Recording in progress.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you and call to order the February 16th, 2023 meeting of the Advisory Committee. And I'd like to read the following statement. This meeting is being held in person and or remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022 and all other applicable laws temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. Is anybody in the room or online recording this meeting? All right, hearing none and seeing none, I will note for the record that Andy McElhaney is joining us remotely, and there are two other boards in attendance, and if you'd like to call your boards to order.
Thank you. Good evening. This meeting of the Hingham Select Board is called to order. I would note that we are adopting the language articulated by the chair of the advisory committee with respect to the open meeting law and Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022. Participating for the Select Board this evening are myself, William Ramsey, Chair, Board Member Elizabeth Klein, and Board Member Joseph Fisher.
Good evening, everyone. I'm calling to order the school committee meeting. I am joined tonight by my fellow school committee members, Ness Carenti, Jen Benham, Carrie Nee, Tim Dempsey, Ali Anderson, and Matt Kosman. We are all here in person, and we are also adopting the language read by the chair.
All right, the first item on our agenda is comments from the public on items that are not on the agenda. Are there any comments from anybody in the room or online? All right, hearing none and seeing none, we'll proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is to hear a presentation of the school proposed 2024 school budget. But before we get there, I'd like to just make a few remarks. First of all, I would like to acknowledge for everybody online and in the room that we have received a number of comments from concerned citizens. Those comments are very much appreciated. They have been distributed to all of the members of the committee. Secondly, after we finish our meeting this evening, or after we finish our discussion this evening, and after the boards have finished their questioning, I will open up the meeting to comments from the public, and either in this room or online. I will set a limited amount of time for those comments, and I would ask that if you are selected to deliver a comment, that you keep your comment to somewhere around 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes, less would be ideal. And please refrain from repeating comments that have already been made. And finally, if you are not able to ask a comment this evening, I will remind you that you can send your comments to the advisory committee, and our email address is located on the town website, or you can send comments to the select board and I'm sure to the school committee as well. So with that as a backdrop, I will turn it over to the school committee.
Thank you very much. As always, Dr. Adams, Katie Roberts, and Aisha are going to bring us through the fiscal year 24 budget presentation, so I will turn it over to the administration.
So we'll just pull up our presentation. Tonight we'll provide you an overview of the budget priorities for the schools. We'll also outline some of the current budget drivers that are driving the school budget. We'll give you a brief review of some academic and social emotional learning data that sort of helps drive some of the priorities of the schools, some financial enrollment data. We'll present information on the three budgets, a level service budget, a balanced budget, and a reduced services budget, and also briefly just outline some unmet needs. Some of the priorities of the Blue Leadership team were to sustain current programming that exists within the Hingham Public Schools. We have great variety for our students that we have lots to be proud of, both that serve the academic needs of our students and the social emotional needs of students. And in our budget, in our level service budget, we work to sustain much of that programming. An effort has been underway in Hingham for several years to provide a multi-tiered system of support that supports academic and social emotional needs of students. That includes staffing, includes systems and structures that provide for identifying students who might be struggling, students also who might need additional enrichment, the professional development that supports our students and our teachers in providing those supports, and the high quality and instruction and curriculum that supports that academic and social emotional needs. In addition, we also want to make sure to invest in our educators so that they have the most recent research-based access to instructional practices and are continuing to develop their craft. We know that our students are changing rapidly. The world is changing rapidly around them, and by providing access to our educators to the most current information, we prepare them to better prepare our students. Having access to well-maintained facilities was important, and investing in preventative measures that allow us to upkeep our school buildings, as well as provide access to high-quality technology so that our students can leverage those for learning. In addition, in the background is our strategic plan. We also wanted to continue to further the investment the community made, the schools made in sort of an outlining a path forward for the schools, which include these 5 strategic objectives. One around fostering communication, collaboration with the community, and really supportive of trying to build up a community again post-pandemic, to really be responsive to the teaching and learning needs of our students, to provide for healthy and equitable and inclusive learning environments, to invest in the capital needs of building and have forward-looking plans that address financial needs of the district, as well as invest in the human resources, our staff, and really foster continued leadership development. We had some budget drivers that influenced our costs. We were informed early in the fall that there is a state agency, the Operational Service Division, that sets tuition rates for special education out of district schools. Their estimate was that tuition could increase as much as 14%. For comparison, that tuition increase varied from 1.87 in some years to as high as 2.72. So that is a significant, extraordinary increase for those tuitions. In addition, we have several contractual bargaining agreements that will expire in August of 2023. As many of us, we're also experiencing increased fuel costs. Those costs are estimated to double for FY24. There is, in the strategic plan, the desire to look at reducing and eliminating the full-day kindergarten tuition. We're one of a very few districts in the South Shore that still charge tuition for kindergarten, for full-day kindergarten. We also want to invest in continuing to develop our curriculum materials. We are using one-time funds of ESSER to fund a new reading program. The current reading program has a copyright of 2014. It's no longer considered a valid research-based program. Many of our curriculum adoptions were put on hold because of the pandemic. We also need a new math curriculum that also hasn't been looked at for several years. So that is an important budget driver for us looking forward. We want to really invest in the best materials for our teachers so that they have the best resources and can invest their time and energies on really meeting the needs of students. Increased transportation costs, also linked to increased fuel, difficulty procuring vans that allow us to provide for the transportation needs of the district, increased difficulty in retaining and recruiting bus and van drivers. As part of the budget, we look to increase fees and increase revenue. both our level service and our balance budget include increases in athletics, rentals, activities fees, our after-school programs. There's a strong commitment to the use of our schools. We also want to make sure that our fees cover the costs of utilities and staff time in the school facilities use. So that was part of our budget as well, the consideration of those fees. Our professional development line hasn't been funded. It's been overspent, and we tried to correct that in the level service budget. It didn't reflect our current contractual agreements, specifically around mentoring of new teachers. And it is an area that you'll see in our strategic plan repeated over and over again. Much of it is dependent on continual professional development of our staff. So that was a budget driver for us. We want to just give you a quick snapshot of some academic data and some SEL data that served as a driver also to our budget. I'll pass it on to Katie.
Great, thanks, Dr. Adams. So for those of you who have been tuning in regularly to our school committee meetings, you're very familiar at this point with this slide here, which represents our multi-tiered system of support. Just to summarize again, for those of you new to the conversation, MTSS refers to a tiered system of support that uses data and progress monitoring to provide students with what they need. It's short bursts of targeted intervention to help students meet proficiency. So pre-pandemic, we expressed the need for a more comprehensive and fully fleshed out MTSS. Our district has always had components of MTSS, but did not have a fully comprehensive system. So at the base of an MTSS system is just very solid tier 1 instruction, which is our general classroom instruction. But for those students who aren't quite there yet, not quite meeting those grade level standards, we need to provide increasing tiers of interventions with increasing intensity. And so previously, we did have some robust tier 3 interventions for the students who needed it the absolute most. But it was really those students in the middle that needed just a little bit more that were getting lost in the system that we had before. And so again, this need existed pre-pandemic. It was something that we were messaging and working towards, both in terms of budget and in terms of our systems and structures. And of course, once the pandemic hit, the need for increasing tiered supports became all the more evident. And so over the past couple of years, we have been working towards a fully fleshed out system, and did want to just share some data in the following slides that tell a really, I think, compelling story of the need for MTSS and what a fully fleshed out MTSS system can do. So I will be presenting just a very quick snapshot of what is now, I think, an 80-slide presentation that we'll be giving on February 27th. So stay tuned, school committee, for that compelling presentation. But we're going to just share a few slides that again, tell the story. So pre-pandemic in 2019, 2020, we can see that while many of our students at the middle of the year were making very solid progress towards grade level proficiency, we have always had students in that red and yellow zone that are in need of some additional focused supports in order to achieve grade level proficiency by the end of the year. You can see that during that 2020-21 school year, as is no surprise, for this kindergarten cohort in particular, we really fell off a cliff in terms of student need, and you can see that the needs nearly doubled during the pandemic of students in that red and yellow zone, which indicates those students that need a bit more support. And so during that time, recognizing this need, we did add some additional staff, made some adjustments to our schedule, and created additional structures to support those students who needed more. You can see that over the course of the 2021 and 2022 school years that we have made very steady progress towards returning to where we were pre-pandemic, and in fact, actually inching our students on a bit. So again, this is for our kindergarten cohort that we were most concerned about. The youngest learners, of course, were most impacted by the pandemic. And if we go through some of the other grade levels, this is grade 1. Telling a similar story, pre-pandemic 2019, making that drop off and that a steady progress back back to grade level proficiency because we have this fully fleshed out tiered system of support. Progressing through grade 2, again, showing a similar story. And so this is, this data here is representing the grade 2 longitudinal data over time. This next slide, though, I think tells an equally interesting story. This is going to trace a single cohort of students. So these students would have been kindergartners in that 2020-21 school year. And you can see, again, that red and yellow is very striking, indicating the students who were not were in danger of not meeting grade level proficiency. That year, again, we built the MTSS system and fleshed it out. And you can see the impact that it has had in regaining our students' grade level proficiency over years. So following this cohort from 2020-21, at which we only had about 49% of our students at or above benchmark, increasing to 66% in 21-22 and 85% in 2022-23. And so again, really illustrating the impact of that system, particularly on our youngest learners. So that data there that I was presenting was an early literacy screener known as Acadian Stibbles. This screener here is for our older children. So that previous screener was targeting those early literacy skills of phonics, phonemic awareness, and so on. For our older students and literacy, we'll be targeting other literacy skills like reading comprehension, vocabulary, morphology, and so on. And you can, again, see similar gains for these students for beginning of year to middle of year. We do not have the same longitudinal data for this metric because one of the things that we added during the fleshing out of the MTSS system was some additional data sources for us to track the progress of our students. So we did have early literacy data going back decades, but for the students in upper elementary, for literacy and K-5 and math, we really didn't have the same level of screening to help us monitor student progress and to monitor needs. So this is giving you a snapshot for the upper elementary students and their progress in literacy. The next slide gives you a similar snapshot for early elementary math, seeing the progress from beginning of year to middle of year. And so again, we're trying to get all students to green, which indicates on grade level performance. And we'll now turn it back to Dr. Adams to share some of the special education data that goes hand in hand with our MTSS.
I think it's important to highlight a couple of things. One, MTSS is a best practice. It's not in response, it is in response to the pandemic, but it's something that is a best practice in order to provide for students' needs. So it's not something I would say, well, we're all done and we can stop. The progress that you see in many cases, to quote Ms. Eastwood at South, principal at South, she'd say the progress we made is because of the investments that were made in staffing in FY22. We have the staffing we need in order to really influence and impact the students who are struggling. And so to quote her, we have the staffing. Now we've built the ship, now we got to keep it going. So much of the progress you see here is because of those resources, in addition to the work that classroom teachers are doing every day with students, in addition to some of this work with staff around looking at the data and understanding the data and being responsive to students' needs. And this is these investments long-term impact our ability to also, because you'll see in the next slide, our increase in special education numbers is when we intervene early, we then have greater impact in long-term in reducing those numbers and really influencing the reading needs of students and the math and social emotional learning needs of students. So in this slide, you'll see that we're we're seeing an increase in our special education students, which is another driver in our budget, as well as the number of 504s. Our Section 504s focus on students also with disabilities who need accommodations in the classroom. just one, we presented some data last week to advisory, some more detailed data, but we are seeing in our community has been impacted in the last few months with the social emotional learning needs, mental health needs that are widespread across our nation. And this is just one small piece of data that shows IEP approximate hospitalizations and that increase that you see in hospitalizations due to mental health needs. And we'll do a brief review of some financial and enrollment data.
This slide here, what this slide here does is just gives an idea of how our budget is broken down. 83% of our budget really consists of personnel costs. And when we get later on into the presentation, when we look at reductions, you will see that we are hit heaviest at the personnel level. And that is only a product of the fact that most of our budget really consists of personnel. And in terms of the contractual part of it, which is 12%, and the non-contractual of 5% is the area where we have the most flexibility. So the areas that you will see when we get to reductions being hit the hardest of the non-contractual supplies, textbooks, and personnel, because these are the areas where we have that flexibility.
A little snapshot into enrollment. We did see enrollment. We will see that enrollment did decrease because of the pandemic. We hope to have that stabilize. You'll see in the next slide, we do enrollment by middle, high school, and pre-K through 5. We do find that our elementary numbers are stabilizing, and we just did our enrollment for February, and we saw an increase in a couple of students at our elementary grades. So we see that sort of stabilizing, and we're working hard to maintain and keep our students through and really showcase all that our middle school and high school has to offer. In addition, we'll just share a little bit about our per pupil in-district total expenditures. You'll see data by comparable districts. There's a difference between comparable and benchmark districts. Comparable districts are the ones the state would compare us to. Those are the districts that have similar demographics, similar socioeconomic status factors. You'll see that Hingham is closer to the end. You'll see two numbers in district expenditures. Those are excluding those out of district special education cost. And then you'll see total expenditures. This is a per pupil. It is delayed. It's an FY21 data because the state data is delayed a year. So we're waiting for our FY22 data to have a different comparison. In the next slide, you'll see a comparison to the benchmark districts. Again, you'll see Hingham down near the lower end. This would not have included those investments made in FY22 or FY23. In addition, you'll see that our student to staff ratio is right in the middle, in line with other comparable districts. This uses 21-22 data. And then it's well with benchmark districts. We're right in the middle as well.
This slide here looks at our revolving funds. For revolving funds, the way they work, based on the description of the fund itself, it can only be used for specific types of activity. So for example, our full day kindergarten can only be used against expenses for full day kindergarten. Kids in Action can only be used for that program and any expenses that relate to that program. So this gives an idea of where we are in terms of those funds, and we have budgeted and estimated receipts and expenses for those funds for 23 and 24. In terms of the athletic fees, this year the school committee made a big investment in tennis courts. And 300,000 of our tennis courts that are being updated as we speak. There's work being done on that. Came from that athletic revolving fund. Okay. This slide here is a summary of all the grants and revolving funds that we have access to and contributes to our various programming. On the first half, top half of the slide, there are special education grants, whether it be IDA, EEC, and Circuit Breaker, which is the major Circuit Breaker and IDA are the main grants that are available to us. And we typically use those grants to fund tuitions. While we will, just like most other school districts, while we had quite a few grants in terms of IDA, ARP funds, and ESSA funds available during the pandemic, a lot of those funds are not available going forward. And as we look at our tuitions and how we can fund tuitions with those increases that are happening, we're also seeing the grant money also reducing as well, which means that there's more that's going to be charged to our operating budget. As part of putting together our budget, one of the things that we did is that we tried to make sure that we met with principals and other administrators, and we took a deep dive into our budget and looked at areas where we could become more efficient. So what we did here is that we look at the budget and try to find efficiencies within the budget and make reductions or adjustments, I should say, based on those areas where we could be more efficient. Where there were additional needs needed, we also looked at how we could reallocate or use those resources to reallocate funds. So, for example, one of the big reallocations that you will see later on as we go through is with our paraeducators, where a new teacher was needed for special education, and we were able to move kids into different classrooms and adjust the way we structure the classrooms to make sure that we could reduce the number of paras to increase the number of special education teachers. So we, as part of putting together our budget of our level services budget, we tried to make sure that we were finding efficiencies where we could, reallocate where we could, and then we came up with our level service budget based on our actual needs. Okay. Just to go through in terms of what that meant from our elementary, all in total, in terms of all our different schools and departments, we were able to reduce the current budget before we got to a level services budget by $855,000. Those were some of those efficiencies that were made. Those would include some of the things that you would have seen in the past, for example, retirements that would have occurred. One of the big things that happened as well, there was a new app that the technology department used where you could actually see the usage of certain programs within the district. And using that software, we could see where the teachers used some of the software most or least. So we could make some reductions in how much we spent on those apps or programs based on that data that we had available. So that was one of those efficiency reductions we were able to make even before we put the level service budget together. Okay. In terms of reallocations, we spoke about the paraprofessionals. We're moving from contracted services to an actual speech and language pathologist, where we think that in terms of that reallocation, what it does is that we can provide more services to our students, even with a little bit of a reduction in the cost as well. Another thing that we've never really quite had at Plymouth River School was one FTE for the music department. So we were able to reallocate some of those reductions in paraeducation and speech and language contractual services to make sure that we could make the music department whole at PRS and bring it up to one FTE. And that was done through those reallocations. Okay. For the facilities, in the facilities and maintenance department, we had a change in staffing this year where our facilities engineer that we hired, we had a little bit of a delta between the old and the new facilities manager, and we're proposing using some of these extra funds to get a licensed trade person or add one more person on staff. So that again is just a reallocation that we've done rather than just adding on things. We're looking at where we can reduce or find efficiencies and then add on based on those numbers. Okay. Then after we went through this process, we were then able to develop our level service budget that we felt very comfortable and proud of in terms of making sure that it would meet the needs of all our students. And I think that the school committee and the superintendent, Dr. Adams, and I, and the administration, we're very pleased with the budget that we put together based on that. As all the other departments were asked to do, we put together the level service budget, and the balance budget. And we also put together a list of unmet needs as well that we will review with you today as well. So this is the presentation of the level services budget. What I will do here is focus on the areas where there are significant increases or changes from 2023 to 2024 based on the level service budget and the 2023 budget, just to give you an idea as to where those changes have occurred. A lot of what we discuss here is a build-up from what we've discussed before in terms of the main ideas and the main drivers that we discussed earlier in the presentation. I think these are just the numbers that we're matching up with some of those previous conversations, okay? So here we started off with professional development. Dr. Adams spoke very well earlier in terms of just kind of describing to us in a very, very deep manner about why we need professional development and why it's important. We put the numbers here to that discussion as well in terms of showing you that in 2022, the actual expenditure for professional development exceeded the budgeted amounts. And in this year, in 2024, we're making that whole in terms of bringing that number up so we can meet our contractual needs as well as the needs of our teachers and students. Okay. In the student activity line, that number goes up a bit. What we did a little bit different, although it looks like it's a big increase here, it really isn't a big increase. I'm just presenting things a little bit different this year, and I just want to bring that to your attention. In that the revolving funds account, at the bottom, you'll see the full 1.9 million here of the revolving. It doesn't really, some of the numbers in 2023 actually reflect net of the revolving, whereas I can point out to you that, for example, the student activity fund is not. So some of that would be reduced by the revolving funds in that account as well, okay? One of the other things that we've been working towards as well is trying to improve our collections on that activity fund from how much we collect from our students. We're seeing more and more over time that a lot of it is being absorbed by the operating budget. And hence, part of that increase is because of that. But we'll continue to try to make sure that we can increase efforts to try to collect those funds from students as well. In terms of heating of buildings, Dr. Adams spoke about the increased costs for heating. One of our contracts this year, we saw that in October of next year, it expires, and the cost of that contract goes up by actually more than doubles actually for next year. So that's a big driver because most of our schools are heated by natural gas. Hopefully, by the time we get there, the war in Ukraine is over, and we'll all benefit from better gas prices. But I can't guarantee that, so we have to put it into here. Okay. Employee benefits and retirement, that reflects some of our employee costs and retirement fees. And the SPED programming, the tuition costs here, although Dr. Adams mentioned that it was a 14% increase, what's happening here is because some of our grant money is no longer available anymore, one, and secondly, some of our grant money is being used for other services that we're providing for special education. Less of it is available to be charged to tuitions, and hence more of it is being spent on the operating budget here. Okay. So that gives you a summary of just kind of the main areas that we've kind of spoken about before, and just kind of put in numbers to those increases. I don't know if, should we pause here for any questions at this point, or is everybody happy and ready to get to the end?
I think we have like just a couple more slides on the reduced services, so we'll finish up and then we'll take questions.
All right, that's fair.
Via the chair. So for the reduced service budget, just a quick summary. We want to say that each of what we shared with you is each decision we made was a challenging one. Each person, FTE that we talk about is a service that is provided to students and families and staff. So it's extremely challenging. It's been a challenging time in our schools, but we are grateful for the professionalism of our educators who go in every day and do all they can and every day for our students. So we're grateful. So this is extremely challenging, and each represents a loss to our community to have these discussions. And if we end up implementing this balanced budget, you'll notice this is a summary at the elementary, 26 FTEs, middle school 13 FTEs, high school 14 FTEs. Athletics includes a reduction of freshman athletic sports. These are our proposed reductions, including an increase in fees as well. The central office, 3.5 FTEs, a decrease in curriculum and professional development, reduction of that maintenance tradesperson that we wanted to add, 2 FTEs, which are 2 special education administrators, reduction in technology. The transportation includes putting in a fee for grades 7 through 12 for students to ride the bus. I believe we settled on $200 for that fee to ride the bus. So that's to generate that revenue for transportation. So it's a total of 60.6 FTEs. That includes the $4 million that we know is the budget deficit, and approximately 800,000 for unemployment, estimated unemployment that might be needed.
Okay. And we kind of mentioned on Tuesday during our meeting on Monday that there is potential for the unemployment to be absorbed, but because that hasn't been voted yet, we've still kept those numbers at the 4.8 until it becomes actually voted and agreed to, and then we will take the next step of determining which reductions will be updated at that point, and we'll share that with you at the February 27th meeting. Okay.
And then finally, we were asked by school committee to think about what additional needs. And really, briefly, we went back and thought about our strategic objectives for our strategic plan, and would outline one of those being the continual capital needs of the schools. Much of our capital outlay funding is used for technology, which means there's less for preventative maintenance of our schools. And we all seem to be always in an emergency situation, using our operating costs to respond to capital needs and facility needs. So moving or absorbing that 300,000 into the operating budget would allow us to really use capital outlay for those capital needs. We're seeing increased needs, medical needs of our students, and added a nursing coordinator to help support coordination of medical and nursing needs of students. We talked about professional development already, and that being a central component of the strategic plan. So we continually try to, I think that's an essential component of the strategic plan that we want to see funded. We did add the level service budget does include a decrease in the full day kindergarten, not an elimination. But this is the cost of what it would cost to eliminate that full day kindergarten fee.
Okay.
And I'll turn it back to the chair.
Yes, thank you. I did realize that when I introduced the school committee here today, I forgot to introduce Alex at the end, who is filling in for our student representative. So Alex, thank you for being here today. Thank you for the great presentation. We've heard it a few times, but it never seeks to shock me what this reduction potential balance budget looks like, and the impact it will have on the district. So I guess I will, if you're ready, I'll open it up to questions from select board or advisory or comments.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Dr. Adams and Aisha. I appreciate the wonderful presentation. We did have the benefit of hearing it last week, but it doesn't get old, it doesn't get stale.
Numbers don't change.
Thank you, very much appreciated. There is so much to absorb that I think it's helpful truly to hear it one more time. I've got one quick question, then I will turn it over to the rest of my committee, who asked a number of questions, Bill, and then we'll turn the bulk of it over to you guys. Dr. Adams, you mentioned that in the level services budget, there's an allowance for full-day kindergarten. How much is that? Can you say?
Remind me.
So the way it works is that we, as part of the way we saw full-day kindergarten is we saw it as something that because we're only one of 5 districts on the South Shore and one of 25 or 26 in Massachusetts, that it's one of those things as part of our strategic plan that we should be reducing over time. So as part of this level services budget, we've reduced the kindergarten by $500. It's currently at $3,007, and we brought it down to 3.2. So our plan is, rather than, although as part of our unmet needs, we have the $900,000, which reflects the full cost of the kindergarten, we're gradually working towards reducing that over time.
So reduces it by 500.
Yep.
Per person. Did you want to know the total number? So it's reduces it by $500 per student.
Per
We
student.
don't-
$500.
No, $500 per student.
We don't know exactly how many.
Expensive.
Yeah. We don't know exactly how many students yet because
Right,
registration
exactly.
remains open. But
Yep.
We estimated, yes.
Right.
300 students, 200,
200, 250.
about 200 to 250 students.
Right.
Right now, for this year, it's 3,700 and 3,200 next year.
So yes,
In the level service budget.
in the level service budget.
In the reduced budget, it goes up to 4,000.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I will ask my colleagues, any questions that were not asked last week or clarifications? Seeing none.
Sorry, I do.
Sorry. Lean forward.
Something I didn't think of last week that popped up in my head due to your slides today. With the decrease in enrollment numbers, how does that affect the budget? I'm sure it does. I just don't know how.
So I think the biggest way is that although we're seeing a reduction in the number of students, overall, we're seeing an increase in special education needs and SEL needs and social emotional needs within the district. That's one of the ways that's where the increase is mostly coming up in terms of those needs that we're seeing with the tuition and other factors. And we're also, unfortunately, in an economy right now where costs are not going down. I think that is where that delta in terms of that increase in our budget is really being driven from. So I think the key area to look at would be the drivers of the budget in terms of what's really costing us a lot more this time around.
And there's a difference between elementary and middle and high school. In elementary, you can say you have 23 kids in a classroom, you need a teacher. And you can sort of make predictions about. At middle and high school, it's really driven by a schedule and the offerings that are offered. And you have to have a seat at every place in a schedule, especially in middle school, to have the kids for safety and security. They need somewhere to be every 7 periods. And so it gets a little more complicated so that we've lost enrollment, but it's harder to reduce because it's not the same as losing 25 students. And as you saw, that our enrollment at elementary is pretty stable and actually slightly increasing. And we hope that with our kindergarten numbers, we'll see pre-pandemic numbers in our kindergarten as well, and are working hard to sort of promote all that the Hingham schools have to offer to bring those folks back. So it's still hard at the middle school and high school because you have to have a place to put every single kid every period.
And just to bring to your attention as well, that as part of our efficiency changes, there were certain positions that weren't filled because of reduces in our numbers. So just to make you aware of that as well. Part of that 800,000 that you see in terms of overall efficiencies includes some of those positions that we just didn't fill after people retired or left.
I think
what I was thinking, part of what I was thinking when I asked the question was, is there any funding that as a district we don't get because the numbers have gone down? Like, does it impact the budget
In
that
terms of
way?
that, there are two areas
Mm.
that may be impacted. Chapter 70 funding may be impacted, and where we've seen a reduction in Title I funding and Title II funding, it's not direct. Title I is not directly in terms of numbers as a whole, but in terms of the socio-economic numbers of our district, where the DESE looks at our poverty numbers, and because the poverty numbers in Hingham has decreased over time, which is a good thing, that means people are doing better, right? Then we've lost some of that funding as well.
Michelle, you would say anything? No, I'm good. Thank
Okay.
you.
I just had a question about kindergarten. So a half-day kindergarten is free. Is that
Yes.
true? Okay, so what percentage of parents elect full-day kindergarten, which they pay for, versus going to half-day?
Students last year, and by the time 2 students elected for half day last year, and before the year was over, we had probably 1.
Because they see all the fun that
Yes.
all the other kids are having, and they've got to leave when it's lunchtime and
Right.
playtime, and they
More
say,
fun coming.
yeah, they say, I want to stay, and so they eventually, the parents change.
Right,
So,
and what
so
happened?
basically, every
Yeah.
kid is doing
Exactly.
full-day kindergarten
Basically, yes.
Exactly.
and paying for it.
Yes.
Yes. And just to give you an idea as well, we also have a sliding scale as well, so that based on the income of parents, they pay a certain amount of the tuition. As you can imagine, there are not many people who fall within those lower brackets, but we do have a few families that benefit from those adjustments as well.
And out of the 4 towns on the South Shore that also are in the same situation as that do charge for kindergarten are of the wealthier towns on the South Shore. And then I think it was Whitman Hanson. They just recently started paying for full day kindergarten, and the main driver behind that was because they only had 62% participation in full day kindergarten.
I'm sorry. 62%
Participation when it wasn't free. So then I think it was either last year or maybe it was 2 years ago. They switched to free. I'm sorry. I think I spoke on that.
I was reflecting on the same question that Sarah had. We had a citizen share a letter with us asking about the whole ratio of students reducing over time and the cost per student. But I did think it was interesting looking at the metrics that you shared that the real reduction was really between 2019 and 2020, 2021 year. And the metrics you were sharing on the cost per student were 2021 that put us like right in the middle. So when I was thinking about like the 2021 versus today, and the increase, like the reduction of students was only about 100, right? So it almost seems like where we are today at the average cost per student. My point is the reduction is like before that time period. You know what I mean? So if you were to go back, you would be at a much less average cost per student. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
That's
So previous to the pandemic, the per pupil spend was much lower. Yeah, it was much lower.
Did we see those metrics before, or is this some new information that
No,
we're
we
just
didn't.
showing
We've
since the
seen those
pandemic?
before.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so this is like we're basically on par
On
with the
par.
other.
Right,
with our budget
even
today.
and even with the increased spending that we're seeing now, across the state, most other districts also received ESSA funds and other funds and invested a lot more into their schools as well. So we haven't seen those new numbers yet for 22, 23.
Right.
23 is still going on now, but for 22, but we don't anticipate any big huge swings in any other direction.
I think when I think about it, the number seems stark, nearly, I think, 500 student decline in enrollment, which is about 9%, but it is across 13 grades or 13 grades, K through 12, and then across 6 buildings. So when you sort of break it down, and then inside those buildings, there's 4 or 5 sections. So it's really a handful or less of children in the elementary level, sort of at each grade level or each classroom. So it isn't like, oh, we've lost this many students, we could eliminate these many positions, because it just improved the student teacher ratio, and not significantly. I think we were 14 to 1 and now 12 to 12 to 1. So it wasn't a huge shift in the student teacher ratio and the per pupil spend. We're still directionally where we were before.
Thank you.
Bill, I'm not seeing any hands. Andy is online, but I don't see his hand up. So I'll turn it over to you and your board.
Great, thank you. So I guess I'll start off with a couple of questions. So it's great to see the grade level efficiency increase. I know that 2 years ago when we voted for the additional FTEs and to increase the budget, the drop off, the learning loss was a big driver for my vote. And I think my colleagues at the time shared the same sentiment and voted for the increase. So how is that assessed? Is that assessed solely through MCAS?
So the data that I presented tonight, MCAS is one metric. However, that gives us just a single snapshot at the end of the year. We use other metrics, including at early elementary for reading. We use an early literacy screener known as Acadience Dibbles. That's a nationally normed assessment for grades 3 to 5 reading. We use what's called an iReady diagnostic. And similarly for K-5 math, we use an iReady diagnostic. And again, the early learners are the ones that we were most concerned about with the pandemic learning losses, and are the ones that we have been actively gathering data on, progress monitoring, and so on.
And Katie, is it math and literacy are the two main metrics that drive that?
Yeah, so when we're speaking of MTSS, we're primarily speaking of the foundational skills of reading and mathematics. And MCAS science is also assessed, but science is generally not considered part of that MTSS structure, which is really focused on those foundational skills of literacy and math.
That MCAS is seen as often called a summative assessment because it's at the end, right? What we were sharing with you, we call formative because we can do it in time and then respond. Like we don't have to wait to the end of the year and get MCAS a year later, in the next school year. So the data we're sharing is real data. Teachers see it and they can change their practice and respond immediately. And so that's why you see the growth from beginning to middle of the year and not waiting for that MCAS. And so that's some of the structures that have been put into place this year, in addition to the staffing put into place in FY22, so that we're more responsive to student needs and more flexible because we're immediately using that data to make changes. Both teachers are making changes in their classroom and the interventionists are supporting and making changes immediately, because I can say, you need to work on your multiplication facts, and we can say, you need to work on that 12 table, and we can immediately give you support to do so, and we can be responsive. And so that's kind of the difference that you see in the data. We could share MCAS data, but that's old. This is really recent and more immediate, and we can respond immediately. So that's the difference.
Well, it's great. Again, it's great to see the increase, to see where we're back to where we were 2 years ago. The other question I've got is the unmet needs budget and the additional request for the nursing coordinator. It's my understanding that some of the departments at the high school, like they wear two hats. Like the math, I'm sure Mr. Jewett, he teaches in addition to being the math department head. I know Mr. Kirkaldy used to do both. I'm sure that the current history department head does the same thing. Have you considered giving additional compensation to an existing nurse and ask them to do take on more responsibilities and save the money of adding the new FTE?
Yeah, that's a possibility. One of the things that we're challenged to do is find subs. So when a nurse is out, so this nursing coordinator would help coordinate the nurses, but also serve as a sub when someone's out, so that they could be able to be responsive immediately. They could support, we also get subs to support screening that's needed so that someone's covering the nursing aspect and then doing screening as well. So this would be someone who is doing hands-on with nurses, but also supporting the coordination they need, the professional development they need in order to better meet students' needs. So you'll see a number of those 504s are increased. Some of those are significant medical needs that require coordination and support. So that's the intent. If we have to do that, we can be creative as we've been. We do have a nursing coordinator, someone who gets a stipend, but they're also a full-time nurse. So they're a full-time nurse in their school building, and they're getting a small stipend to do some coordination. But it's challenging because you're trying to do your job every day and also do some of that work. So that was the intent of that.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll turn to Liz, see if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you. It's a great presentation. I have seen it multiple times. Luckily, because there's a lot of data here. But great job. And I appreciate you presenting all the data and being so transparent with the data and the revolving funds. And that it's really helpful just to understand all of that. I had a question about the number of students on IEPs and 504s. What do you think is driving that? The drastic increase?
I think the pandemic, had a great impact on that, as well as the need to develop that MTSS. That work started several years ago. Folks recognized the need to create immediate responsive supports, the need to have data that allows teachers in schools to be responsive. I also share, in addition, principals are looking at that data and saying, where are the places I need more support? Where are the places teachers might need more support? And using it, where are places we're looking at the curriculum level to say, where is the curriculum perhaps not responsive to students' needs? So it has multiple, so we're using the information to really support a cycle of improvement, as well as consider how we're better meeting the needs of those students. I think there is an increase in social emotional needs of students, more anxiety among our young people. I think technology hasn't helped in some cases, that the communication skills of our students who are younger, we're often relying on devices with our young people, and instead of lots of talk and conversation. And I think we're seeing that. I think every district across the nation is probably seeing increased needs in their early childhood programs because of increased needs just in general of young people as well. So I think it's threefold. That's a long answer to say the pandemic has an influence. I think there are increased social emotional needs, and also among our youngest learners, we're seeing increases in early childhood. And third, our need to be responsive and create an MTSS responsive program that meets immediately students' needs as early as possible, and not have special ed be the game when your kid is struggling.
Right.
So I think it's those three things.
Okay. So are we identifying children earlier that maybe we were missing before the pandemic, or before we had MTSS or the right number of resources?
That could be part of it, yes.
Okay. And then I know you mentioned, obviously we know there's social emotional needs across the community. And I think anxiety now qualifies for a 504. Is that right? Okay.
It could, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Because I know, I was asked a question by a parent, the pandemic or learning loss doesn't cause a learning disability, which is a true statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's other things going on here that is driving these numbers, it seems.
Just briefly, the difference between a 504 and an IEP is whether or not the curriculum material needs to be modified or adapted for the student.
Yeah, if the student needs specialized instruction, then they get an IEP, and 504 is just accommodations.
So a disability does not guarantee an IEP or a 504 if you do not need modifications or accommodations to the curriculum.
Okay.
So it's the need, not the label, that gets the service.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Joe?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. And I do want to acknowledge something. There's a long-standing Hingham tradition that students in the middle of winter will walk around in shorts. And I see it's been honored here. It's a warm day, but I do see that you're honoring that tradition. So thank you. I want to turn to a couple topics. One is a topic that I heard a lot of in prior years, and one that I personally am interested in, which is the music program. And there was comments from parents, I don't know if it's last year or the year before, making sure that the music program at the school is supported. I'm wondering if you view that program now is supported, and where is it in the budget? Because I'm not sure I could really locate it.
So, in the, do you mean in the level service or the balanced budget, or reduced services? budget?
Level service.
The level service maintains our music programs, as they are, maintains our director of fine arts. Ms. Bellis has been, our director of fine arts has been an enormous, contributor to strengthening and developing, our arts programming. We saw, a drop in enrollment, during the pandemic, in our music programs and arts programs, something about doing music virtually that just doesn't, it's not the same.
Right.
Or doing drama or doing visual arts. And so she's been instrumental in building up that program and really creating opportunities for students, several grants that she's written. So she's an important part of that. Versus the balanced budget impacts that position. That director, a proposal is to eliminate that position, as well as institute a fee for grade 5 instrumental music. It's a hard decision for us to make, but as we started to get into 60 FTEs, we then made a decision: do we have another FTE that we're eliminating, or do we institute a fee for that program? So not a good choice, a hard choice for us
That's
to
a very
make.
hard choice, yes.
And it's a wonderful opportunity for our students to be able to engage in 5th grade in band and orchestra or chorus, and really develop a strong opportunity to appreciate music and the arts in 5th grade, that carries interest further for some students into the middle school and high school.
Absolutely.
So it was
Okay.
a hard choice for us.
Thank you. You've heard some questions about enrollment and the decline in enrollment, and I've heard responses that the school committee or the schools themselves are looking to reverse that. It wasn't clear to me exactly what steps are being taken, and it wasn't clear to me exactly what your projection is for enrollment the next fiscal year and the year after that, if you have those.
Yep, we have some enrollment data from the MSBA project, Foster, that was some projection data. It shows the projection increasing. I think the variable that probably the MSBA and those projections didn't account for was a pandemic in the middle of that. We need to do a better job of sharing and shouting from mountaintops all the great things that are happening, the unbelievable opportunities that kids have at our middle school, to walk into that tech ed classroom at the middle school and at the high school and see students have opportunities to use problem solving, craftsmanship, creativity, is absolutely amazing. The arts programs and the opportunities that start in kindergarten and go all the way up is amazing. It rivals any opportunity that students would have at a private school. The opportunity to engage in sewing and family and consumer science, but then also go off to high quality, rigorous English curriculum at the same time is amazing. The world languages that we have and offer, and the opportunities for Chinese as early as now in our middle school, is absolutely outstanding. And we need to do better to shout that from the mountaintops. We've been doing some social media, using every avenue we can, going back to in-person programs. Promote what the schools have to offer.
Is there any item in the budget that addresses marketing or the promotions that you're talking about?
The district last year invested in a communication specialist, and she is working hard to do that work with press releases and trying to use all the media we can to really promote that, and trying to come up with creative ideas to do that. And our next sort of venture is how do we also engage our middle school and high school students in some of this work. I think they could be great promoters
they know how to use social media,
They do.
and
Better than I
they
do.
we need their help in sort of promoting because I think their voice talking to other students can be very powerful. Their messaging. We've been targeting parents and adults, and I think we also need to target our kids too because they have a voice also, and where they're going. And I think that needs to be one of the next things we really tackle.
One of the things that we've been, sorry.
I was just going to add, there's, and I can't remember the name, but the pilot that Rick Swanson's going to do at the high school to focus on like a mini minor or a major for
pathways.
Pathways. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we also in the program of studies, we've had a long, it's called the Global Citizens Pathway that you can participate as a sophomore. It's kind of like having a major or minor. You kind of take a certain set of courses and you say you're interested in global studies. There's a project associated with it. We're trying to also institute next year an arts pathway for kids who are interested in the arts. So creating a community within the school, within a big comprehensive high school. If you're interested in the arts, take this pathway and it'll show up on your transcript. In a very competitive college environment, when you this is a way for our kids to sort of stand out. Here, you've participated in an arts pathway, or you participated in a technology education, a tech ed pathway.
Because that's the second. That's the other pathway.
That's the second one, and potentially a STEM pathway in the future as a way to sort of stand out on your transcript in a world where the college environment is extremely competitive. So how do we provide those opportunities for kids within the comprehensive high school?
And then getting back to the first part of my question, is there some place in here where you have your projection for enrollment for next year?
Not in here, no. We'd have to put that together for you. The most recent enrollment work that's been done, enrollment projections, has been as part of the MSBA. I'm not sure the information, because of the pandemic, would be as useful.
What we have done though is in terms of looking at October numbers, October 1 numbers of this last year, 2022, and use those projections to budget for 24. And that's, for example, for kindergarten, what our fees would be, and all these other fees or costs that relate to enrollment. Where we go back to the October 1 numbers to determine those numbers as well. But in terms of looking at it from a long-term perspective.
I'm just thinking, my assumption is when AdCom is looking at the budget, they're going to be looking at it relative to projected school enrollment. And so if that number is not here, I'm not sure how that evaluation is going to go.
Right.
That's what we can say, right? You've got 320 kids that are graduating. We're assuming, don't know for sure, but.
Right. So so in terms of that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In terms of that, we're using those October 2022 numbers as of October 1, 2022, to say that we expect our enrollment to be basically the same for next year. Yeah.
And I think if the level services budget is it's built around those assumptions.
Right.
But if 100, 200, 300 students would come back, we would welcome them back, and it would not change these numbers. We would be able to absorb them back because, again, as we were saying earlier, that these are across 13 grades in 6 different buildings. So it wouldn't be suddenly, oh my gosh, we're going to have to hire 15 new teachers because 200 students came back.
But you'd have additional state revenue coming in.
And you may have more state revenue. Yes.
I mean, there is there's a delay in our Chapter 70 funding, but we can make the assumption that from the federal government, there likely is not more funding coming.
Right.
We can probably assume that. It's unclear at the state level what's happening. We have a new governor, a new session. They're organizing themselves. It's unclear what will happen at the state. We're hopeful that the new governor and with state revenues, that perhaps there might be increases in Chapter 70, but it's unclear at this time what's going to happen at the state level. We're hopeful.
Yeah, but the revenue that's determined on a formula basis, that would increase.
Yes.
Okay. No other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
I think you bring up a great point though, Joe. I think that's why the level services budget and this override getting approved are so important to the district and to the community, right? I mean, with looking at 61 FTE reduction, and over the last couple of years, we've added 33, 34. I mean, you're talking almost 30 additional positions being cut. And that's just devastating to the community, I think. And I think that's what, I mean, it just, the enrollment would, people left because of the pandemic, they had means to leave and go to private schools. And I think we would just continue to see that impact the schools. And just as proponents of public schools, that would just be devastating to the entire community, not just the students and the staff, but just everyone who lives here.
Certainly during the pandemic, people left Hingham schools because they weren't satisfied with the product they were receiving during the pandemic. I think there's been a lot you've heard about the communication with parents that's improved with the new communications director. You've heard about the MTSS system, which, the old Hingham story where the kids who are highest and lowest achieving get well served and the kids in the middle get lost. I don't think that's a true story anymore with MTSS that really works to capture the needs of all of the students in Hingham schools. So I think there's been a huge effort to improve the product that we are offering to parents, as well as communicating that product out to families who have left. But unfortunately, if you left during the pandemic, you're now potentially a junior, senior in high school. You're not going to come back before graduation. It's really a long-term plan to get kids back as they're entering elementary schools. So I think it probably makes a lot of sense to look at the elementary and kindergarten numbers.
But I think also you do have those natural sort of progression years, right? Mm-hmm. So if you left in 3rd grade and you're wrapping up 5th grade, you might come back for middle school, right? Mm-hmm. Or you went 6, 7, 8 somewhere else. Now maybe you're coming back to the high school. And that's what we are really hoping to see. I mean, we have so much to be proud of in our schools. There's amazing work being done. The new programs that are being offered. It really is, there are fantastic years ahead for the schools. We are really just, I think, on the precipice of just really making this just an even better school district than it was before, even at level services, without even adding more to it.
And the flip side is with the reduced services, what effect will that have on our enrollment?
Right.
Which could be devastating.
That's the nail. Thank you. That clarified where I was trying to go with my question.
Yep.
I think the ratio loss of funding, we've already seen it once, and that could spiral, right, and just get worse.
And I think there was one parent that spoke the other night saying there's another massive exit because we don't have these positions. The gap within our schools, the kids who have the means to go to private school would see more and more. And what does that say for our town? Like, there's such a big gap in kids who are provided for public.
Thank you.
Excellent. Good. We have a few more questions.
Absolutely.
I was just.
I didn't know if you wanted me to recognize or if you want to recognize.
So to the enrollment point, I was wondering, so I have a 2nd grader who's in that class that we see a lot of data about because they started kindergarten in that year. And that class is small. I'm wondering, are you seeing kindergarten increases even this year beyond, what we saw in that year where a lot of families opted both, I think a lot of people went elsewhere for kindergarten, and then some people came back for 1st and 2nd, but not in the numbers you would expect. Are we seeing like a course correction in the new kindergarten enrollment?
It's very incremental. It's still early to give you kindergarten enrollment data because that.
What about for like the 2022 year where we have sort of a fully normal year? Did we see people opt in more historically reflective numbers for our kindergarten program?
It was more consistent with previous numbers. What we're seeing now is we just got February enrollment numbers, and we saw an increase of 5 students at our elementary. So it's kind of like this incremental increase. What will start after February break is sort of social media trying to promote, hey, if you have a grade 1 through 12 student, we're ready. Registration's open, fill out the paperwork, we have a seat for you. So we're going to start promoting that after break.
that parents know that we're open for enrollment for next year, and try to bring those families back as much as possible.
Andy has a question.
Yeah, I have one question about enrollment and then two related questions about the budget. First, with regard to enrollment, an obvious difference between private and public schools is that a private school decides in advance how many students it will accept, and presumably it aims for a sweet spot and says, okay, we can do our best work with, let's say, 250 students or 1,000 students, and then accepts that many and then doesn't take the rest. Obviously, a public school makes everybody who shows up at the door. And I just wonder, before you start marketing to increase enrollment, what is the benefit to the town of increasing enrollment? And do you know what the sweet spot is in terms of your ideal enrollment to maximize the benefit of education for all the students you do have?
That's a tough question. No one's asked that before.
I sort of feel like, I mean, the sweet spot to maximize the education for all the students in this town is to bring all the students into the schools, because we think we have the best
That doesn't
product.
make any sense to me, that you're bringing all the students. I mean, you have limited resources. And so there's a number of students that you can provide maximal benefits to. And not just, I understand what you're saying from a sort of sociological perspective, but from an educational perspective, they don't.
Yeah, the private school enrollment data shows that about 10% of students were accessing private schools in Hingham pretty consistently for the last 15 years of data. So it's been pretty consistent. During the pandemic, it dipped to 20%. And so we know pretty consistently we've been servicing 90% of the students in the town previous to the pandemic. Not quite the answer you were looking for, but it's what the historical data would say.
The other issue that we also.
It would be interesting to know what Hingham believes the sweet spot is, but let me move on. With regard to the budget, the revolving funds that are going to be used to offset some of the budget increased from just under 500,000 to just under 2 million. Is that is the 1.9 figure used this year a recurrent number, or is that a enlarged one-time?
So in terms of the revolving funds and the use of that, this year we have increased our use of the revolving funds, and we've also increased fees along with that as well. So the plan is to continue to have that increase as well as time goes by, based on the revenue and receipts of the revolving fund. So these are just estimates in terms of that. When we get actuals in, we can provide a more clear answer in terms of what has actually been received and what can actually be put against the budget. But that is a plan to continue to do that, yes.
Do you have any sense of what the number would be going forward?
So in terms of that, I don't want to predict and then you run the tapes next year and say I didn't do the right thing. So I want to make sure that whatever I say it can be held true, right? Okay. It is an estimate.
My question is, you projected a level service budget that's a 5.14% increase over last year's budget. Did I read that right?
That's right. Thank you.
And the Sustainability Budget Task Force recommends that going forward, expenses increase no more than 3.5% annually. Is that something that the full committee could live with going forward? That being a 3.5% annual increase.
I think that will, I mean, it will depend on a lot of factors, including whether or not we start the year with level services funding or not, right? Because if we have a bigger net number, dollar number to begin with, then it's a little easier to stick with the percentages. I mean, we are open to, I understand that there is potentially discussion about entering into a memorandum of understanding that we will endeavor to maintain services between 3.5% and 4%. But I don't think we've landed on what that number will be.
I think you have to remember those significant budget drivers that are driving the budget this year, those special education tuition costs, those fuel costs. I mean, we're all dependent on the economy around us. And so the schools' personnel costs, we're seeing that in every economic sector, we're seeing personnel costs increase. So we're dependent on some of those economic factors in that increase that you see in the budget. We're trying to do two things with the revolving funds. We're trying to create new programming so that we can sustain and build those revolving funds. And second, we're increasing the fees. And we intend to monitor really closely those fees and the collection of them so that we're able to maintain the service. Like we're not using our operating costs to cover those additional programs. So we're doing those two things, creations of programs and really increasing fees and monitoring their collection.
Yeah, and if I could just add to 83% of our costs are personnel, and we are currently in negotiations with all 6 bargaining units. So once those are set, we'll have a lot more information as far as what the costs will be going forward.
But if you want a sign of hope, the 14% increase in out-of-district tuitions, much of that is reimbursed through the circuit breaker money, and that money is reimbursed a year after the fact. So that if the tuitions go up 14% this year, and that's a stabilizing, and they continue at that rate, then it will be a 1-year disruption of our budget.
Right, and 70% of that will be reimbursed. Yes,
yes, 70%.
Yes,
not all.
Yeah.
With regard to the 14%, as they say the average, obviously, do we have any sense of what the actual increases are likely to be in the schools that you will use?
It's not a state average.
It's not an average.
Right.
The state sets the
fees.
The state sets the fee.
And just to give you an update on that.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The state sets the fee. So it's not an average. It will be 14%. The state has signaled that the increase that they are going to put through for out-of-district tuitions is going to be 14%.
And
for every district.
And we've actually received those tuition rates right now.
Yeah.
And they are at that level.
I think the point of confusion is that when a private individual who's paying their own way goes to a private school, they pay whatever tuition the private school wants them to pay. When a public school system sends someone to an out-of-district placement, that rate is set by the state.
So every tuition at every school is going to be raised by 14%?
For private special education schools.
Private and residential schools will be raised by 14%. We do have, for example, some of our students go to other public schools, other collaboratives, and for those, we're not seeing a rate up to 14%. These rates are lower. And in terms of our budgeting, that we've used 5% as that threshold for those particular schools. Hopefully those come in lower, but we haven't received all of those fees as yet. So the collaboratives, the other public schools, those would be lower than the 14%.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Andy?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is that we don't know yet what the actual increases will be for our out-of-district students, right?
Well, we do.
We do.
Yes.
It's going to be 14%. It's going to be 14%.
Andy, I think I heard Aisha say that they have already received some of those numbers, and they are at the 14% level.
Yes.
So it would seem as though 14% was an accurate number.
Yeah. It's not the news that I want to give either, Andy, but it is what it is, right?
Is that it, Andy? Do you have another question? Or?
Yep, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a clarification question that I don't know why it just occurred to me tonight, Katie. The MTSS, is that an elementary system?
It is a K-8 system, and it does continue through the high school, but really the emphasis in terms of pandemic learning loss and such, we were very focused on our most vulnerable students, which were our youngest learners. So the data that we've been most closely monitoring are for our youngest learners who were most impacted by the pandemic.
So, I mean, so in parts of it may still exist in middle school and high school, but it goes to your statement that you really want to focus on.
In terms of our investment in
It suddenly occurred to me that it's something that you said that it was an elementary school program, but
the data
it's just that
presented
the
tonight
bulk
is
of
just
the
to tell,
focus is-
to tell, that's right. And one other thing just to note is that MTSS, tonight we were presenting the academic data. MTSS also refers to social emotional needs. So there's in parallel with the academic structures and staffing. So in the other 100 slides, yeah, so. Yes. Yep.
Is the social emotional screening that goes K-12, doesn't it?
So yes, we have different screeners at different levels.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
But this is the MTSS for social emotional does go through 12th grade. Okay.
Yes.
Questions?
George, I just have a quick point. I wanted to add something that Tim had said. I just wanted to back it up. So I had a meeting last week with Joan Moschino, our state rep, and I'd asked her after discussions with Dr. Adams to consider supporting some state funding to help towns bridge the 1 year that Tim is referencing to get through that 14% year for next year. She said she'll look at it. She also said that all of her communities have been asking the same questions. So every town, I think, is asking for the state to come in and help bridge that year. So hopefully that happens too.
I just have one final question on the strategic plan. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is one of the objectives of that plan was to look at the services that are being delivered and the way that they're being delivered, and maybe to look at best practices and that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering if any of that information came out in the plan.
So we're engaging in 3 processes right now that I think the strategic plan is broad in some places. So partly in there, you'll see developing a technology plan, which is a best practice for school districts. You'll see many districts have a technology plan. So we're undergoing that process right now. Part of that process, as Aisha said, is looking at the computer programs, the instructional programs teachers are using. What is actually the usage of them? What's the cost of them? How many students are accessing them? And is it cost efficient? And so that's the whole process we're going in right now. That plan all of these plans are coming at the end of the year. After this budget cycle, so they really will inform next year's budget. Another plan that's best practice is having a professional development plan that will really outline and deepen some of what's in the strategic goal and have really specific goals and action steps that we're taking. So that's a process that's going on right now. We're also engaging in an equity audit that will help us think about how we're providing for equity and inclusion in our schools. And so that also is a process we're going through. And all of that comes later on in the year. So it really informs the next budget process. The strategic plan, we presented an update to the school committee I think it was this week.
I think it was this week.
So it's an evolving document. And so Monday we presented much of the stuff that we've been doing to sort of meet those goals. In the summertime, as a leadership team, we'll look at those goals and revise them and say, have we met? Some of them we're going to exceed and go beyond, and some of them will still be struggling to make progress towards. And that's sort of the work that cycle of continuous improvement is. How do we move forward in this particular goal? How do we need to revise it or change it? And those that we exceed, we just keep saying, hey, what's the next step? And so that's kind of the work that's happening. We're in year 1, and I'm very proud of all that we've already accomplished. And we still have, I think, about 70 more days of school, or maybe 875-ish to go, and I'm
Let's go.
proud of what.
And I can forward you the update to the advisory committee and the select board if you'd like that the administration gave, because we were all very pleased and also proud of the work that has been completed to date in just that first year. Yeah, some great progress.
Thank you.
I have a question, but I think it's so hypothetical that I don't even know if it's a logical question.
So let me start with that.
We're all here to learn. Wait a second.
So I'm imagining that so we hired these additional educators because we had tremendous learning loss when we moved to virtual and online learning for such a long period of time. And if we hadn't had the pandemic and we hadn't moved to online learning, but we had still hired these additional educators, then do we believe we're going to have improved educational outcome and achievement to our students that we're going to be able to show and prove?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think we're
100%.
already showing that.
Yeah. And I do think that, because I'm glad you asked that hypothetical question that ended up having an actual answer to it. But I think the other thing too, and I know this comes up a lot, that the positions were added to deal with the learning loss from the pandemic. But many people in this room were here as long as I've been here, that actually some of those positions were presented prior to the pandemic because there were populations in the schools that were not meeting, and there were large gaps, and learning loss isn't the right word, but there were huge learning gaps between special education students and other populations of students that we were trying to address. And that, I think, informed some of the budget decisions just before the pandemic.
And all the students in the middle,
And all
the
students in the
ones that
middle, yes.
aren't the high achievers or the kids in special ed.
MTSS was started prior pandemic. The work on that was started before.
Yes.
Building on that, I think some of the maybe questions and confusion on that are when we look at the slides, what we see the extra positions doing so far is like bringing back to baseline. And so it almost feels like the answer to the question isn't quite there yet until there's a year or two more if we continue to see like valuable returns on these positions. So I assume that's something that you'll keep monitoring to show us if there continues to be that kind of, returns on these investments.
The exciting thing about it too is that even from the beginning of the school year, when kids came back from the summer break to now, we're seeing such improvement just in terms of that time frame that it's very exciting to see what comes next.
Can't wait to present. We're going to present middle of year at the end of the month, but we can't wait to show what the students accomplished by the end of the year. A full academic year, post-pandemic. We can't wait.
I don't want to steal Katie Roberts' words, but as she said so eloquently the other night, the goal of public education is to get to 100% or at grade level. So you can see even from pre-pandemic, we were very far from that. And so that is the goal, and that is what we're aiming for.
I think that would be awesome, right? We said go down and then come back up to similar-ish numbers, but to see that the red and yellow continue to shrink.
Exactly.
And I think the heart of your question is, are we building the infrastructure to really be able to look at that data?
Is this the right infrastructure to
Right.
do it? It was certainly the infrastructure to help correct
Yeah.
pandemic learning loss. I think it's just we haven't seen the answer to the question
Yeah.
yet in
But
the data. Is it the right infrastructure to continue?
Right, and there's
narrowing
the
that
extra teachers. The infrastructure I'm talking about is that we have a data team in the district that meets monthly to go over all this data. We have an educational programming subcommittee of the school committee that looks at this data, in addition to the iReady and all the sort of programs and the formative assessments that we're doing on students. So we have a very strong set of beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year data for all students. So, which is significantly more robust than looking at MCAS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you.
I'm really enjoying reading all the letters from the citizens that have been sent to us. I think they've been super helpful, so I would say keep them coming. I don't know if others the one that really hit home was again from a citizen who was talking about other areas of increasing revenue funding, for lack of a better word. This resident mentioned the Hingham Sports Partnership, which is voluntary and citizens contributing to that. And I was curious, are there other type of areas within the school that we see that similar type of contributions, or are there different areas where that could be another place to?
There's a lot.
tap
There
into?
are a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. We've got the PTOs,
Yeah,
the
PTO,
Hingham Education Foundation, which, I mean, they
The
at one
Arts
point did
Alliance.
250,000 contribution to kindergarten computer science program. The Hingham Arts Alliance is a new group that started to support the arts in the school. All the boosters organizations. So
But there is a
Music
line that
parents.
you can't cross.
Yeah, I think that the hard
Yes.
part with
Right.
that is they are supplementing, and they're groups that should be in addition to what a public education already provides, not providing what our budget should be providing.
Right.
And we know that when you cut things from the budget, it becomes a parent tax, that parents are paying for tutors and all these other services that the schools used to supply. And I think right now it's just a side note, the CPAC, the Special Education Parents Advisory Council, has a survey out that's trying to capture the numbers of what specifically special ed parents are having to spend out of their own pockets to supplement what their kids need. So that'll be an interesting set of data to look at with that.
Yeah, and to Ali's point about there's a line you can't cross. I was the PTO president at one of the elementary schools, and the principal asked the PTO to provide speed bumps. That's not something the PTO should be providing.
I hope the concrete ones are not the parents.
We didn't. We just said no.
Or the children.
Lay down in front of class.
Right, I think it's about
I'll take
exhaustive.
Thursdays.
So I'm going to open it up and take some questions either online or from the audience here. As I said at the beginning, we'll set aside a few minutes here, probably around 15 minutes or so. And again, I'll ask you to keep your remarks to less than 2 minutes and not to repeat things that have already been said. So this lady with her hand up, please. You would approach the podium, give us your name and your address.
Hi, my name is Melissa Sadler. I live at 28 Highview Drive. There's been a lot of exhaustive talk over the past few weeks, months about the balanced budget, which in my opinion gets us below sea level. Then you have talk of the level services budget, which in my opinion gets us at sea level. There hasn't been a lot of talk about what is the right number of the budget that gets us above sea level. We keep glazing over the unmet needs, $1.5 million on top of, I'm sure there's lengthy other needs that we're not addressing. So I'm asking you, I'm imploring you to put forth the right number to fully fund the Hingham Public Schools. It's the right thing to do for the students, the right thing to do for the teachers. It's the right thing to do for the future of this town. And I challenge anybody that questions the ability to do this override. Become a substitute teacher for a day. Walk a mile in our teachers' shoes. Anyone in this room can do it. Simply download the application online. It takes 2 seconds. They're in dire need of subs. And if you ever want to see what you're made of, we've had a lot of talk about kindergarten. Walk into a kindergarten class of 20 5- and 6-year-olds staring at you and pray that there is a paraeducator to help you that day. Because when there's not, and trust me, I speak 5- and 6-year-old. I have young kids. I don't have an education background. I was in sales. I've done it, okay? And before you can even get the room, you talk about herding cats. Today, within the first 4 minutes of school, kid sticks his finger in the locker, drops his lunchbox, girl trips over the floor, someone dropped their water bottle, kid's like, I shouldn't have come to school today, I don't feel good. Someone's sneezing, someone has to go to the bathroom, kid forgot his lunch, doesn't know what he wants for lunch. What happened to the other kid? Oh, he just took off. Where'd he go? He went to the nurse. He wanted to turn his library book. This is before, yes, you get it. Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much.
The point, excuse me, the point of my statement is you are talking about presenting a balanced budget that gets rid of paraeducators, that gets rid of these reading and writing specialists that help these teachers every single day. So before we talk about what the right thing to do is, I ask you to think about walking a mile in their shoes, go into these classrooms, do what they do for a day, and then you'll think really hard and long about cutting the budget for this school. So I'll ask you one more time. I implore you to put forth the budget number on the warrant that fully funds the school budget for our students and the future of this town. Thank you.
Mary?
Good evening, Mary Power, 1 King Philip Path. I think the time has come for an override, but I don't know yet whether I support this override because important details are still forthcoming. The increase that used to be required to maintain level services for the education budget used to be a little over 3%. It's now 5%. Facing similar tuition and utility rate increases, the level services increase for some of our peer communities is well below 5%. Wellesley's FY24 level services increase is 2.89%, Milton 3.5%, Duxbury 3.35%. Like Hingham, Needham's proposed budget increase is 5%, but their budget proposal funds over 14 new full-time equivalent positions. It's been said that Hingham doesn't have an expense problem, it has a revenue problem. I think it has both, and am concerned that so far in this process, we are only addressing the revenue issue. Successful overrides require both resetting the base and ensuring that future revenue and expense rates are in alignment. When an override resets the base, new revenue only grows at 2.5% a year. If the largest budget continues to grow by 5%, the town will quickly find itself needing an override simply to maintain services. If that happens, it will be harder to fund new services and new capital projects. There is discussion about a commitment as to the timing of the next override. For me, it will be difficult to support any override without one. I think taxpayers need time to absorb the tax increase from the debt exclusion in the fall and this override, which combined look to be about a 20% increase over the next 3 years, assuming a $6 million override. In my experience, these tax increases will be challenging for many households to absorb, including households that do not qualify for tax relief programs. I also question whether median household income data captures the economic diversity that exists in our town today and that we have said is important to maintain. As we move forward towards town meeting, please keep in mind all our citizens and consider both revenue and expense growth. Thank you for your continued work on behalf of our community.
Thank you. Liza, and then we're going to go online for some folks. So, no, go ahead.
19 Porters Cove Road.
Liza, if I may just say, I appreciate the stack of books, but please, we're trying to get as many comments, so don't read from every one of them.
I'm not, no, I don't need to. There's a lot of repetition in those books. Liza O'Reilly, I served on the school committee for 9 years, from May 2013 to 2022. This budget year is tough for all of you. But finally, the town has some choices. I support the override to maintain level services in the schools, and the balanced budget is very painful to look at. From FY10 to FY23, the school committee and the town proposed level services budgets necessary to meet student and citizens' needs. And revenues were restricted to new growth, reserve fund transfers, federal grants. The revenue was never enough, so school committee and town budgets were balanced by cutting costs. And we never had level services. We were asked to propose level services budgets, but they were always cut. So I implore you, read the advisory committee report in each and every one of these warrants. Chronologically, you can find them online, and you'll see that this was never done. Katie Roberts spoke to the gains that the additional staff have provided. I'd like to point out that on January 24th this year, the Board of Education meeting was addressing COVID learning deficits and achievement gaps and setting targets of how we want to close those gaps as a state. they referred to 2019 proficiency levels. But other board members said, why are we settling for that? We need to go beyond that. Hingham will be required to meet what these standards are. I am very worried that the reality of the balanced budget proposal will eliminate the additional staff we've heard tonight has been so helpful to our students. And Hingham will be in serious jeopardy of meeting the obligations of state and federal accountability targets. Do we really want to go there? So let's have a true, at least level services budget for the first time in a long time. This also will meet the goals of and the vision of our master plan of fulfilling the services that our community said that it wants and that we want it to have. So also, I thank the select board for actually supporting the opportunity to give us a chance to vote on an override this year. It's the first time since 2010 that we've had a chance, and I hope we can vote on a full override, not just half that was put forth at that time. I thank the school committee for all their work and for supporting the effort of an override. And I ask respectfully to the advisory committee to support it as well, so we can show the full cooperation and collaboration of our town at this vital time of supporting what we need for Hingham. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised online, so, sorry. So Ray Estes is, would you unmute yourself, Ray, and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Sorry for not being in the room tonight. I couldn't make it. Just briefly, I served also on the school committee. I'm very familiar with budgets over the years, and I really appreciate the comments that have been made by everybody so far this evening. It's kind of a very telling experience to go through this. I just wanted to express my personal opinion. I think it's vital that we adopt an override to right-size the school budget, but also to support town-wide needs for public safety, library, and other necessary services that Hingham residents deserve. I am also not sure what the correct number is, and I think that'll flush itself out over the next few weeks. But it's important to remember that, and I think it's been said, this is not a new discussion. We've known for well over a decade that at some point we were going to need an operational override. Former town administrator Ted Alexiadis used to talk about it frequently. There were many discussions during budget season about a structural deficit and spending beyond our means. And when the new growth started to slow and dry up, it became clear that we were going to have to find another revenue source. Unfortunately, that in this case means higher taxes for some. I do agree that at the same time, when we examine revenue, we have to examine expenses. But I wanted to just make one other point. I think it's important to remember in the context of this discussion, and it's been mentioned tonight about fees and other sources of revenues, that this is public education, and that's been mentioned many times as well. And public education, in my opinion, and I think of the opinion of many in the room, should be paid for to the largest extent possible by all of the taxpayers. It shouldn't be carried by fees of a few users. Certainly, in our educational system in Hingham, there are necessary fees that are customary and reasonable and acceptable. But many parents over the years have been getting more and more exhausted, really, of paying fees to help support programs that the budget simply can't. Increasing fees to privately fund more of the educational experience that we want to deliver to our kids is really not the answer. So I would ask, for those of you who are looking for other ways to fund not only the school budget, but also town budgets, to not just look at individual user fees, but also the entire tax base, particularly with respect to schools, as it should be public education supported by all taxpayers. I think someone mentioned Hingham Sports Partnership. I happen to be a board member of Hingham Sports Partnership, and we certainly do entertain grants from the schools and award grants on a regular basis. But HSP was founded in 1995, intended to be a supplement, and I heard that word used, for the booster programs for the sports, not to be a supplement for the school budget. And a lot of times that's what we have become. And when we get a grant request, we examine it very closely. And one of the first questions we ask is, why isn't this being paid for in the context of the school budget? So I just want folks to, as they examine this, they examine the expense side, they examine the revenue side, and make a determination about what the appropriate number is going forward and how we can find a way to fund that. To think about this as public education and not try to target a few users and increase fees to support the public education that we want to deliver to our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I'll take one final comment from the lady in the back.
Hi, I'm Brindy Marine, and I'm at 12 Pilgrim Road. And I was talking to my principal, who's Miss Mary Eastwood, who's just wonderful. And in practice, so in line, right, when we get rid of a specialist at a school, right, at a elementary school, we're going to say that they can share specialists, which sounds like, easy to share, right, that they can go back and forth. It's a small town. In practice, a specialist at an elementary school is not just a specialist. They don't only teach children library in the classroom. They're also there for pickup. They're also there at recess. They're also there after school for drop off. So other way around, drop off in the morning, pick up in the afternoon. Without sharing in this case is not caring. Without each of the schools having their own specialists, you're taking drop off and pickup away. You're taking safety resources for children away from elementary schools. And that's just one microcosm of what these cuts, how they will impact the school. Missy had such a wonderful point of go into the schools and see how, I have 3 minutes.
2 minutes. And you're pretty close to the end of it. I'm going to give you a little extra time, but please try not to repeat things that have already been said. We do have a number of other items to cover this evening.
Great. I would encourage you to go into the school and see what the people that you're cutting do besides their job, because it's impactful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have additional items on our agenda. You're more than welcome to stay, or if you'd like to go, we understand that also.
I assume folks would like to go. So but before we leave, I do want to just thank you very much for your time, for the public's time. I see lots of people on the call, for the select board times, for the town hall administrators for being here, and for your consideration of this budget. I understand, and we all here understand, that our goal or our role as school committee members is to advocate for our students and our schools. We also understand that all of us have a responsibility to all of the townspeople, which includes children and their families. So we appreciate the time and consideration that you're putting forth to consider our budget requests. They were well thought out. They were well prepared. There was a lot of work put in there. I think a lot of really good decisions made, some things we've not seen before with efficiencies and reallocations, and I hope you'll take that into consideration. I recognize that a 5% budget increase it's not palpable or palatable for multiple years, but we really do believe that if we can get this level of service done this year, that will help, maybe not fully right size, but it will lift up the budget dollars enough that we can try to commit out without extraordinary expenses like out of district tuitions or whatnot, that we really can do what we can to keep those budget at a more 3.5% to 4% range each year. So we appreciate your consideration. We do not take this lightly, the responsibility that not only we have, but you have as well. So we appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the school committee.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Are you running the show, Tom? Is
Ready to roll.
Michelle or both of you?
Yeah, I'll be presenting it.
Okay.
Ready?
We are ready.
All right. I'll promise I'll be less than 2 hours.
Oh, thank you.
That's actually not even funny. I'll be less than an hour, I promise.
Whatever it takes. We are here for you. Tom.
We've got a lot to go over. The select board has had the benefit of a little bit of a preview of some of this, but I'm going to go over it because I need AdCom to hear all of it as well as, of course, the community. So we'll start out by talking about a little bit about context around this year's budget process. We'll go over the balanced budget, which will cover the reductions as the school department just did. We'll go through my recommended budget for FY24, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's to come and when. Okay, so starting off, just some budget context. I think it's important to understand that what we're looking at here is a significant deficit resulting, in fact, from critical capacity that was added during the pandemic, to the schools and the town during the pandemic. So I just don't want to lose track of that. Most towns also across the state are realizing that 2.5% is simply not enough to cover services anymore. So that's also a reality. Of course, we need to find ways to maintain control over these expenses, but 2.5% is not cutting it. And then, of course, we have we're trying to use we used one-time federal and local reserve funds in 22 and 23. The last bullet is really one of the most important things I'll say tonight, and the idea is that as we get through the pandemic, we're either going and we're trying to fund the gap that was created in 22 and 23. We're ultimately going to either have to reduce services or increase recurring revenue. So that's really what we're talking about. The recurring revenue would, of course, come through an operational override. Just very briefly, I'll pop through these just to reset our collective memories. Back at ATM, at annual town meeting in 21, your chair at the time, Bob Curley, is quoted as saying that for fiscal 23 at the time was the thought, the town faces the prospect of an override to address what is essentially a structural deficit in the budget. And then fast forward a few months, the Sustainable Budgeting Task Force had been formed and done its work. A number of items came out of that report, including the last comment, I'll start with the bottom, is that we need to consider an operational override as we move forward to maintain and grow services. And their recommendation was in 2024. A number of items came out of that. Also out of that report. The town was experiencing increased budget pressure from regular expenditure growth for a long time prior to the pandemic. They also recommend, the committee also recommended that we seek to should seek both tax and non-tax revenue to provide the services that we need. As has been mentioned several times tonight, I think we need to target the 3.5% growth rates. That's going to be key as we get into our MOU that was mentioned by Kerry and Michelle a little earlier. 3.5% is what was recommended by the Sustainable Budgeting Task Force, who I'll remind everyone was formed in a very purposefully in a very collaborative manner. Liz Klein from the Select Board chaired it. Michelle from my office helped to staff it. We had Representative Donna Smallwood, former chair of AdCom, on there. And we also had the sitting superintendent at the time, plus the sitting, thank you, business manager was there throughout the entire process, as well as a member of the school committee. So there was a very collaborative, open process, free exchange of ideas. And again, these are the recommendations that came out of that. So we will be seeking to consider closing the FY23 budget. The budget that we're in right now using one-time funds, which is why we're recommending an override in 24. And then, of course, in the 22 warrant, we had a quote that we will need to reconcile revenues with expenses through an override. So again, this is not a surprise. This is something that's been coming, and I think the town is prepared for and has been educated on. So moving into our balanced budget, right now, I just want to remind everyone, I've said this a couple of times in joint sessions and elsewhere, that the town is required to provide a balanced budget. That is what we're going to do. The current deficit going in right now is $6.2 million. The municipal portion of that is just under 2.2 million. We heard the schools 4+ earlier. So this is the other side of that deficit coin. One of the approaches that me and my team took as we identified the cuts that we would apply in the event an override was not passed was that we wanted to make sure we maintained our contractual obligations and any legal requirements, of course. We also wanted to make sure that we focused our remaining funds on the core municipal services that municipalities are expected and required to provide. We took off the top all of the requests that had been added back in FY22. We tried to spread the impact of these cuts across the entirety of the organization. And as I did with the select board a couple of weeks ago, and as I'm doing here now, we will demonstrate the community impact. We'll demonstrate to the community the impact of these cuts. And of course, if an override does fail, these restrictions or reductions would in fact go into place on July 1st. All right, so this is just a general, I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail, but general government, public safety, public works, and recreation, and culture and recreation will be cut about $500,000 each, with human services at about $150,000. We're looking at 22+ total FTE losses in the event that these reductions need to be employed. All right, through the general government sector, there's a lot. First, I'll start with saying, and I should have started with every one of these reductions that we're going to talk about is, we're not. I think you said this once, Michelle. That how did you phrase it? The town is not fluffy. we don't have a fluffy budget. We're always running lean and mean, and we have the budget we need to provide the services that the town needs to receive. And when you start reducing these budgets, it gets deep very quickly and starts to impact people in real serious ways very quickly. So you're going to see a lot of that in here, as you did with the school department. So we would be reducing the Conservation Commission's support for the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board, the Affordable Housing Trust, as well as all of the applicants and projects that come before those boards. We would be slowing economic development efforts. Ironically, that's something that we would have to do, which is the thing that would likely get us out of this hole. So, but that's nonetheless a reality. We would be reducing support for the select board, myself, and other boards and committees, which would result in decreased capacity and efficiencies across the town. We would be reducing the support for department heads in all aspects of local government. We would be closing GAR Hall as well as 308 Cushing, which would directly affect the rowing team, who is a lesser over there. We would be decreasing the municipal or maintenance of municipal facilities. We would be cutting the GIS capacity down, which is used across the organization for strategic decision making. And we would be reducing our ability to effectively communicate by canceling our communications contract. Public safety. This is one that scares a lot of people. Like that other one is uncomfortable. This one could be deemed as scary in ways. We would be reducing police support to the schools. That would affect safety and security for sure. It would be a less of a police presence at drop-off and pickup, which would affect traffic safety, community and youth relations programs. The DARE program would be cut, and classroom curriculum attendance participation would also be decreased. We would diminish the ability to support the community members with mental health crises. We would reduce our animal control response capabilities. The police administration support for the police administration would be cut, which would slow our accreditation process. And we would be decreasing the fire department's minimum manning from currently at 11 to 9. So that's a direct impact. That would remove either an engine or an ambulance from our active response tools, which would increase response times and, of course, exacerbate stress levels for the remaining staff, which I'll illustrate in a little while. Also, we would be cutting out things like CPR programs and the like. Public Works, we would be reducing trash and recycling pickup, the mowing of fields, maintenance of public grounds and parks, tree planting, special community events, etc. We would be delaying things like pothole repair. We would be delaying line painting. We would close the swap shop, and other programs at the transfer station would be affected, like the yard waste area and trash compactors and trailers. The human services sector would see decreases in public health services as a general rule. We would be eliminating the social worker position, which is something that I think is really needed right now. The town has been going through a difficult time recently, and I think that social worker position makes a difference in people's lives, but we would not be able to afford having it. We would also reduce the senior center transportation program significantly, and that will directly affect seniors' abilities to attend appointments, events, programs, and the like. In our culture and recreation sector, we'd be cutting that sector by about $500,000 as well. This would eliminate the very popular townwide field maintenance program that was implemented 2 years ago and has made a big difference. You see that photo in the bottom. That's the result of that program. That would turn back to what it once was. We would be closing the public library on Sundays. We would be reducing children's and other programs at the library, and we would be diminishing the ceremonies marking holidays and special events here in town. Okay, so anticipating that not happening, I'm going to put forward the budget that I do recommend. Okay. I'm calling this our level services and additional requests budget, just for ease of understanding. So my recommendation, it does in fact contain level services from FY23 on, which said another way, all those reductions would not occur. Okay, the reductions that I just mentioned. We would also level services budget as presented by the municipal departments over the last few months. You've seen department heads coming before you since December through January. Those would be presented. Those are in my budget, with the exception of any additional requests. So of the additional requests that were presented by the department heads, I am recommending $673,000 worth of the $1.1 million that we had seen in the presentations that were all made to you. And I'll go through those in a moment. Okay, so this is just a summary page. I'm going to go through each of these additional requests so you can understand better. But I'll note that the firefighter request has been called out special. I'll explain that. I have Chief Murphy online if we need further explanation, but I think I'm going to do my best to do it justice. So we'll go through each of these page by page. So starting with the assistant engineer, many of you were on the board. Maybe not many of you, a few of you left still on the advisory committee. That's right. That's right. When we remade and reimagined the engineering department several years ago, what we said at the time was we wanted to redistribute the tasks that department had traditionally been providing. And we've done a lot of that. And it's been a couple of years since that occurred. And I also said at the time that we would be reevaluating the department and its staffing as we get a better sense of what they actually need versus what we thought they needed. That's occurred. That's happened. The reality is our approach of one engineer with no backup engineering staff is just not working, despite the reallocation of some of the tasks. You can see here all the things that are happening, or many of the things that are happening. I don't want to say that things are getting missed or dropped, because they're not, but working our engineer to the level that we are right now is simply not sustainable. So we need that assistant engineer. It's a critical position. Well, the senior center is also asking for a program coordinator. This has been a topic of conversation I've had with the senior center for several years. This has now made my list of additional requests this year. The idea here is there's over 40 hours that the current staff is employing in programming level responsibility, and that's in addition to their regular work, and that includes the director. And when the director isn't doing things like strategic planning and seeking federal grants or state grants, that's problematic when they're busy setting up tables for programs. So we need to get the right staff doing the right jobs, and that's why I'm recommending this. I will note that of our 16 peer communities that have senior centers, 12 of them are reported employing at least one full-time program coordinator. And this request comes in at $65,000. Sustainability coordinator. Everything old becomes new again, right? We did this last year. We had gone back and forth as to whether we wanted it to be a salaried position or if we wanted to try to do it as a contract position and see what the need was. And that's kind of where we landed. So we left it in the expenses lines. We funded it. And then lo and behold, the state, Joan Moschino and Pat O'Connor were able to come through for us and get an earmark in the state budget to actually pay for this position as a contracted position in year one. So that's been great. That's underway. Our contract employee is actively engaged and doing wonderful things, working closely with Art. The main task that this position is really going to have to undertake is the implementation of the climate action plan. That is a significant effort. We set a goal as a town of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2040, and it's one I think that I've heard from this current board is a priority, and I think we heard from the town meeting a couple of years ago loud and clear that was a priority for the entire community. So that said, I'm asking for $49,000 as a partial funding because the contract that's funded through the state earmark will actually run through November. So I only need this FY24 for this position to be partially funded. It would have to then be fully funded in 25 and going forward. But for FY24, we'll only need some partial funding to the tune of about $49,000. Just to drill home that point of the sustainability coordinator and the action plan. So it's a draft plan. Granted, by the way, it's on the website. Feel free to peruse it. Again, goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2040. There are 6 action categories, 129 action steps, 58 of which with town roles. Someone will need to coordinate, track, educate, determine compliance and qualifications, et cetera, seek funding for implementing all those tasks. And that's what we're anticipating the sustainability coordinator doing. Okay, we're also asking that the administrative assistant in the Veteran Services Office be moved from a 20-hour per week position up to a full-time position, so up to 35. That job is currently being done by the world's greatest volunteer, John Asher, and has been for several months as he's filling in for our vacancy. This has been a really hard position to fill. We've filled it twice. We've done several actual job seeking efforts, and it's a tough position to fill. So I firmly believe that there's enough work for that to be a full-time position, and if we make it a full-time position, I do believe we'll get better qualified candidates that will more fill the need that Hingham has. So I'm recommending that position also be moved to a full 35 hours, and that's an additional request of just under 21 grand. Okay, this one. Hopefully everyone sees the need on this committee for this. It seems really obvious to us. We hadn't brought this before for a number of reasons, but the reality is most communities now are using more modern budgeting tools than our Excel tables. So I think we need to move out of that world into a modern budgeting software and hope that will help us streamline the budget development process as well as increase efficiency and really transparency. Many of the things that we do now with Excel are all fully capable. We've had a couple of demonstrations so far. We got more later, I think tomorrow, and we'll continue to get quotes on this. Just so you know, that additional request is a smidge high. Well, it's likely to come down a little, but for now it's $50,000. And the tools, it's important to note, will do not just budget development, but also salary and expenditure projections, financial forecasting, capital planning, reporting, to the point that when we're in negotiations with the union, we can type in the terms of the negotiations and get an actual printout of the effects of those terms on the budget. So I think when the person that was giving us the demonstration on the software yesterday, I stopped him and wished him happy Valentine's Day, because I told him I loved him. I think. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. It's really exciting to be able to see the functionality built into this software. So hopefully that's something that everyone can wrap their head around. Okay. So one that's a little bit more difficult to grasp, but I'll do my best here. So we're asking for 4 firefighters this year. I start off by saying this is a long-standing request, something we've actually been seeking, or the chief has been seeking for a number of years. I'm not always able to bring it forward because it's a $400,000 ask. For those of you that have been on AdCom, there's never $400,000 additional in any budget cycle to be able to fund 4 new firefighters. So the reality is I'm bringing this forward this year because this is an override year, okay? The idea is to move the maximum manning from 13 to 14. I have a graphic in a minute that will help explain all this, but we're gonna move the maximum manning from 13 to 14, and hopefully that will decrease the need to bring firefighters in on overtime and holdovers in order to preserve the minimum staffing of 11. And again, I have a graphic that will show that. This fourth bullet point is really shocking. I think that I'm not sure everyone would fully normally understand this, that there is one shift filled with overtime every day in the past year. 58% of those were filled at double time because people didn't volunteer for their overtime shift. So the chief had to force firefighters to stay on an additional shift. And I know you all heard that when he came in and presented to them. We, after doing a number with John Asher and with Chief Murphy and others, we've done a number of modeling efforts that are showing that we'll be able to likely offset the total cost to the town. Note I didn't say budget, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the total cost of the town of the $392,000 cost of these firefighters will be offset out of overtime costs to the town. Now, the reason I didn't say budget is because you'll note that the town, can you jump ahead two slides just for a second? So you'll note that the town is regularly significantly under budgeting the fire overtime. I know I don't have to tell advisory committee this, but for anyone that's listening online, please know that is a reality. And the way that's funded is through the reserve fund and the reserve fund either the reserve fund or the reserve fund process through additional funds at town meeting, usually with Article 11. So we need to fix this. This is a structural problem, and we need to fix it. So that $392,000 that we're going to spend in the budget for 4 new firefighters will lower the total cost to the town of overtime, but not necessarily out of the budget, which is obviously where it would be easiest to us show the offset, right? But not necessarily out of the budget. So I just wanted to point that but we will be able to offset the cost to the town of that amount of money. All right, so going back one slide. So this helps us all to understand the problem and how we're trying to solve it. So I wish the school department was here. I tried to do a little algebra. It's probably not algebra, but whatever. All right, so right now we have 13. That's our current maximum staffing, with our minimum staffing at 11 firefighters. So just so everyone understands, we cannot have fewer than 11 firefighters working in town across all 3 stations at any one time. And we have maximum staffing of 13, so our budget only allows for up to 13 firefighters working. So what we're trying to do is bump that number to 14 so that we have a delta of 3 firefighters. That means that, the firefighters that are out on sick leave or vacations, personal leave, on the job injury or OJI, et cetera, will be able to be out of the office without requiring that the department backfill them with overtime shifts. All right, just in case that wasn't clear, I thought this graphic might help explain it. One note, I'm just going to pause here for a second. I think one note that's important for the town to understand, and I know all of you already do because you've talked to the chief, but in case anyone is going to watch this or hears this from the town, I think it's really important for everybody to understand this. The people that we're talking about being out on long-term injury or on-the-job injuries are the people that are responding to these horrible, horrific incidents that we all read about in social media. Are the people that roll up on the Apple Store, where I won't get graphic, but there are significant, serious injuries that are debilitating to witness and certainly to care for the people there. So when back in the day, right, in the 80s and 90s and maybe even the aughts, right, everyone, you were told, right, we've seen this, suck it up, get back to work, stop complaining. Nowadays, we know that there are long-term effects to that kind of behavior. So we are now, as a society, I think, offering diagnoses of things like post-traumatic stress disorder, and that there are clinical approaches to solving or to helping people with those problems in medical ways. That requires time off. That was not normally done 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we're seeing that. We're seeing these new firefighters taking care of themselves, I think, in a better way. I think the town would appreciate that. But I wanted to drill home why we're seeing these spikes in overtime needs. And I think that it's a lot of people will call it generational, but that feels derogatory to the current generation. I think it's more societal as we've evolved. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out there. Jumping ahead 2 slides. And again, these 2 slides, I think you've all seen these before. Back in 1980, we had 67 firefighters on staff. Then Prop 2.5 happened. We dropped down to 52. We slowly inched our way back, but we're still 10 firefighters fewer than we were 40 years ago on staff. And call volume only increases as population does. So that number is not going to slow. That these calls are still going to happen whether we have 11 firefighters, 12, 13, or 14. So that's something to bear in mind. So those are the firefighters. And again, at the end, when we ask for go for questions, Chief Murphy is on the phone if somebody needs a little more explanation of the firefighter request. Okay, the other item so this is we've categorized this as a shared benefit. This is boosting the town's capital budget. We do a little bit of that each year. We add about $100,000 to it each year. I'm looking to goose it by a full $500,000 as a part of the override. The capital outlay plan is supposed to be budgeted to the tune of 3 to 6% per the AdCom's financial policy, and currently we're at 2.7. So we're out of sync with our own financial policy. So adding $500,000 would bring us back within. I want to guess it's in the ballpark of 3.2 or so, 3.2% or so is where that would move it to. So it's not significantly up, but it's certainly within the range and not too low.
I know it's been a little bit of a hot potato, but
just because it ties in with this particular topic, have we landed on whether what's happening with capital outlay as relates to the school technology budget?
Do you know?
I think that's part of their additional request at this point. I'm not sure.
So we haven't moved, or
They haven't
moved it. It's a capital request this year.
It's still a capital request. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the last thing I want to do, I don't have many slides left, so I will take a minute to read this blue box because I think it's important for everyone to hear. The capital assets of the town comprise the town's physical infrastructure inherited from previous generations and intended to be passed on to future generations. It is the aggregate property, plant, and equipment used by the town. We are the current caretakers. It is our collective responsibility to maintain, replace, when necessary, upgrade, and or expand as directed by town meeting, the town's capital assets. That's directly out of our own financial policy. So, we do this to some extent, but I don't think we do it enough. I've for years referred to our capital budget as a structural deficit. I still believe that. This solves some of that problem. I put this one in just because if I can't sleep at night, neither should you. This is the page that keeps me up at night. The number of deferrals that Randy Sylvester has to live through on a regular basis. If he can't do that work, all this gorgeous town of ours is a little bit less gorgeous, if you know what I'm saying. These trucks are held together and sometimes with tape and glue. And that's certainly not, I think, the town that we are. So anyway, throw that out there. Just as a comparison, I think it's helpful to understand the types of requests that we get from our department heads for capital expenditures and the degree to which we're able to fund those. I'll note that the hash box on the FY24 proposed budget is the amount that would be funded with the override. But that's the $500,000. Okay, just a quick summary page. We just heard from the school department. Their additional requests are totaling just over 1.5 million. The municipal total requests, including the firefighter, despite the offset, is about 673,000. The total shared amount through the capital increase is 500,000 for a grand total of about $2.7 million. Couple steps. So we're continuing our outreach campaign. I know we have a couple of our select board members are doing office hours. We've added some functionality as well as information to the website. That will continue. This presentation will be on there first thing in the morning. So that work is continuing. We have a full outreach plan that we're refining each day. We are anticipating public information sessions, probably 2 of them, dates to be determined still, etc. So there's a lot of information still to come. We'll be doing a video series similar to what we did in the fall to help answer regular common questions that we're hearing, etc. The next few items are things that we can expect to have finalized and summarized here in early March. We'll be finalizing the balanced budget reductions. We have a couple of items left. As we always do at the beginning of March, we'll get the true numbers from the health insurance costs. We'll get a final number, well, not a final number, but at least a guide number from the governor when she puts her budget out here at the beginning of March. Again, the legislature doesn't actually pass a budget until, God help us, the end of June, as helpful as that is. But anyway, we'll at least get a guide from the governor's budget here in a few weeks. We'll have the final override proposal in a couple of weeks. We'll then be able to put out a tax impact calculator for the public to understand how the proposed override will affect their taxes. We're going to put together a financial management plan, i.e. the MOU that we've been talking about for a few months. We've begun conversations with the school committee with that. We'll continue them. Chair Ramsey has been helping us with that effort. We have to send the warrant to the printer on March 24th so that it's all in all of your mailboxes a couple of weeks ahead of town meeting. And then, of course, town meeting is on April 24th and the election the following Saturday. just a quick note to remind everyone that in order for an override to be approved, it has to pass majority votes at both town meeting and at the ballot question. And then just a note that this is our active website, again, being updated regularly with new information, new functionality, etc. And that's all I have.
Can I add one additional point? Just one of the points Tom brought up was additional firefighters. And when we had that major fire last summer on Man Street, we only had 11 firefighters working that day. We had to call in assistance from multiple departments. Obviously devastating for the two homeowners that lost their houses that day. If those winds had been differently, that entire neighborhood would have gone up in fire. And to only have 11 firefighters on duty, the bare minimum that we have is a significant public safety risk. Additionally, to say to a firefighter who's just come off a 24-hour shift, you can't go home right now because we don't have someone to backfill you unexpectedly, and we're not going to get someone in here for another 12 or 24 hours, it crushes morale. It also presents a public safety risk that you have fatigued employees, providing a tremendous public service to the town. We're not talking about police officers, but we have a similar problem with our police department where, someone comes off the midnight shift, working midnight to 8, and they're forced now to work the day shift. And that is a major problem because you have a major fatigue issue there as well. But I just want to give some context out of the fire department because I'm the liaison of the fire department. I've heard that from a lot of firefighters that they're concerned about morale issues and public safety issues with the low numbers we currently have.
Can I ask a question related to that?
So our agenda for Tuesday, which has already been drafted, includes a review of all of this information that we have already just seen. So there were some last minute changes where Tom said, yeah, I can present all of this information to us tonight. Select board will be here, perhaps the school committee, so everybody would hear it, the same information. But they are coming back to us on Tuesday. It is getting a little bit late. We have some more items to go, but I don't want to quell the enthusiasm. So if we have a few questions, we can certainly get them now. The information is fresh on everybody's mind, but we will have them coming back on Tuesday, and we can take a deeper dive then. It'll be the main item on our agenda. So I would just ask you a couple of questions, yes, but hold some for Tuesday. So Liz, you had a question.
Yeah, so it actually follows from Mr. Ramsey's question as well. I noticed under the public safety, one of the budget cuts is from 11 firefighters to 9. And then one problem we have right now, obviously, is even sort of maintaining that 11. And that's a problem. How is that even like a conscionable cut for us to propose, given what we're seeing then in the later slides about the fire department?
I hear you. I absolutely hear you. The cuts that we all have, that I have, you can see how draconian they are. You heard from the school department how draconian what they have to do is. These are big numbers. We're not cutting $100,000. They got to cut a couple of million. And like I said at the beginning, we're not fluffy. These cuts get deep very quickly. We would have to take an engine out of service. That is not sustainable for a town this size. But it's what we'd have to do. We would, to answer your question, we would rely, our response times would go up, and we would rely probably pretty heavily on mutual aid from our neighboring towns.
I did. Would adding these firefighters, would it significantly impact income that firefighters are making from overtime now? And would they still have the opportunity to work overtime if they were so motivated to work overtime in order to increase their income?
Yeah, so yes. I'd say fortunately and unfortunately, depending on your position. However, we were showing in here, can you go back to that slide? We were showing in here that I think last year was a $1.7 million overtime budget. This year we're trending to about 1.75, maybe 1.8. And we're up, and we budgeted about 800,000. So the $392,000 in the new firefighter, it's not going to offset $1 million in overtime. There'll be plenty of overtime opportunities for them. Frankly, I'm hopeful that the double time forces go away. That's kind of what I'm hoping happens. There will still be, unfortunately, I think we've seen enough trends to know that there's going to be OJIs. There's going to be on-the-job injuries that are going to have to require people to be out and to get well. And that's where the big expenses really come in. But this gets us a little bit more room to be able to deal with those expenses.
Thank you. I also think that I know the police department, before they force, they ask for volunteers. Yeah. So individuals who would like to work the overtime or make the extra money do it. And then if they get no volunteers, they force based on seniority. So the junior firefighter, the junior officer, I believe, gets forced to do the shift.
I know one of the big challenges of figuring out the override is sort of what to set it at and how many years out that increased amount of money would help cover what we would expect the normal increases to be. What is your current thinking? What are you predicting about this?
Brenda. It's the question. I know it's what we've been working towards. All of these, I think of them all as data points. Everything we're doing is yet another data point to help us craft that projection. The MOU, if you will, what goes into it, what types of, what language. We have a lot of guidance from the Sustainable Budgeting Task Force to see if 3.5 can get us to X number of years. We think it can, but the problem, Brenda, is I don't yet have a size of the override. So our early projections that I don't want to publicize yet are showing that we would be able to get to a reasonable number of years with a reasonable growth rate assumption at an anticipated override size. But that's a very vague answer. I'm going to have a lot more information for you in probably 2 to 3 weeks that I'd feel more comfortable publicizing. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back one question though on the budget for the firefighters would actually. We obviously need to put it in the FY24 budget, but the expenses actually won't hit us until the following year because of hiring and training, correct?
Great point. Thank you, Nancy. It's hard, right? So I would love to be able to say that we're going to put these firefighters in and then that money will immediately be seen the next year, except that it takes a year between posting a job and having a firefighter in a truck because of the amount of time you got to go through with civil service to hire them, and then they're in academy for 6 months. So it's an effort. So we're going to have to fund it hopefully in 24. Frankly, we would use a portion of that year's anticipated salary for those 4 firefighters to help offset that year's overtime budget.
Right.
But it needs to be there in 24 so that we know to hire the firefighters.
Yeah.
And then in 25 is when we're really going to see that. We anticipate seeing that benefit.
So like going back to Aisha's comment, like don't replay that last year. And
right.
You didn't see the big thing.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment, mainly for my AdCom colleagues, about the capital outlay budget, which is a serious issue every year, and we just finalized that budget last night. So what I wanted to say, though, because you wouldn't know this if you're not on capital outlay, the chair, Eric Valentine, has done just an incredible job of getting departments to understand, talk about no fluff. It's not just that there's no fluff, it's they come in knowing these are things I really need, but I've prioritized them this way because I know you can't give me everything, which of course is true. And so it is a very lean budget to begin with. And although it may sound like $500,000 added isn't that big a deal, we actually put in what we would use that override money for. And, it is a big deal. And particularly when it comes to things like certain things for the schools and for DPW, which everything is expensive. I mean, it's just, that's just how it is. So I just want to, thank you for that addition and let people know it's not a fluff budget.
Okay, I think we'll probably take a deeper dive next week. Thank you for the slides. we can certainly go through those and digest them and formulate some questions and that sort of thing. I note that I have a hand raised, Diane DiNapoli,
Sure.
and we'll take a question from Diane. So, Diane, if you could unmute yourself and give us your name and your address. You're still muted. Okay. Diane? She went back to muted, so. Okay. Diane, you're unmuted. Can you hear us? Okay, we'll just go on then. Okay, so we do have some additional agenda items. We're going to go back to some warrant articles that we heard before. You're welcome to stay and hear the rest with us, or if you'd like to adjourn, then it's your choice.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We're not offended.
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Liz? I'm an aye as well. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Good week off next week, everybody.
Members, we have a couple of warrant articles that we have heard before. We have recirculated updated comments, and so I will ask Joe to, Joe, you've got two. You've circulated your updates, and if you want to take it away, if there are no additional comments, we can go right to a vote, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, for Article R, which is to amend the language of Article 18 within the bylaws with regard to the fees for plumbing and gas. Key points on the Article are and were, one, to increase the fees. There was a study done by the building department, which we can go into details if you'd like, and also to change the protocol so that the fees going forward could be updated from time to time as necessary by the select board. All right. And also that the fees that are collected through the plumbing and gas permits, plus fees in a complementary article, Article Z, used to fund a revolving fund that pays for the inspectors who do the actual work of inspecting in the town here, work that is done installing plumbing, gas, and electrical apparatus. So that is the background. With regard to the work that the building department did for the plumbing and gas fees were last adjusted in 2012. That's a slight change from what we looked at last week. Last week, it said that the gas had not been, or the plumbing had not been reviewed since 2010. Closer look at some details proved that to be incorrect, so we've corrected that. And, recognizing the need to keep the revolving fund solvent, the building department looked at over 1,007 different permit applications and the revenue that was gained from them. And then from that, developed the new fees. There's about 30 of them, which we can read, or we can look at your leisure. And so the fees from those expenditures will continue to fund the revolving fund. Expenditures, critical part of controlling how much is taken out of that revolving fund, will continue to be done through another article, Article I, which sets a limit on the amount that can be drawn out from that revolving fund on an annual basis. So with that as kind of the background, the reasons for why this was looked at, I would like to recommend that we amend Article 18 with the language set forth in these Article R.
Thank you, Jerry. We have a second. So, thank you. Are there any questions or comments about the comment or the recommended motion? I see, Al, your hand is somewhere up.
It is. I'm sorry. I have a question. Maybe there's no way around it, but there's no exemption or anything for town projects. Thinking of Foster School.
No, that's if the question.
There is. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there is. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Good.
Okay.
Which, as an aside, adds a significant. We'll be adding a significant amount of work to that department over the next several years.
I knew that came up, and it wasn't clear to me if there was an exception. So you answered it. Yes, it would be better than having them to borrow it as part of the cost of building the school.
True.
Pay it back for 20 years.
Additional questions on the comment or recommended motion? Andy? No. Okay, then we have a motion and a second, so we come to vote. It is a roll call vote. Nancy?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
You get my vote?
Joe?
We did.
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Jason? And Carol?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Joe, you want to keep, you're on a roll here?
Yes, let's keep going. We're almost to the end of the alphabet. So, Article Z, which would be to amend the general bylaws of Article 29 with regard to electrical permit fees. And will the town vote to amend the general bylaws of the town of Hingham adopted March 13th, 1939?
I'm not saying anything.
As, how's that, Andy?
That's fine.
Yeah. All right.
Nobody's ever accused me of having a very soft voice. So start again. That the Article Z is to amend the general bylaws of Article 29 with regard to electrical permit fees. By deleting Article 29 of the general bylaws in its entirety and replacing them with said Article 29 with the language from Article Z. Included in that will be a list of new electric permit fees. Again, there's approximately 30 some odd fees on that list, which certainly we're welcome to look at. The reasons for doing this are very similar to plumbing and gas in that, one, we have to continue to keep the revolving fund for the building department solvent. And in an analysis that was done by the building department of 975 different permit fees over the past 12 months, showed that the total revenue from those needed to be increased, and that those increases will come to us through the implementation of these new fees. Like Article R that we just talked about, another change here to be cognizant of is that moving forward, the adoption of changes to these, both the plumbing, gas, and electrical fees, can be done by the Board of Selectmen as necessary and when necessary. And just as a historical note, the last time these fees were looked at was in 2010, so they're certainly warranted being looked at now. And one other kind of side note, or I think a piece of information that's worth knowing, for both for all the plumbing, gas, and electrical fees, with these new rates that are being implemented, we kind of come into about the median level of fees in the 10 surrounding communities. So we're not way out on our own with these fees at all. So with that, if there's any other questions with regard to this article?
Questions about the comment, edits to the comment?
Well,
If not, we'll take a motion then.
Then I recommend that the town amend Article 29 of the Town of Hingham General Bylaws by depleting the existing Article 29 of the existing bylaws in its entirety and replacing with said article with these new fees listed along with some other points, such as the ability for the selectmen to change these moving forward.
Second. Okay, any additional comments? If not, we will come to vote. Okay, it's a roll call vote again. Nancy?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Eveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Thank you very much. And Kathy, we are now on to Article V.
So Article V is the article brought forward by the Harbor Development Committee that we discussed last week. Article V requests funds for the permitting of inner harbor coastal structures. As Bill Reardon and some of the other members of the Harbor Development Committee discussed last week, basically they need these funds to complete the permitting process due to the fact that the state changed regulations in unanticipated ways. That's number one. And second, the inflationary costs have gone up since the money was first approved in 2015 and then a later approval in 2017. So the article basically asks the town to raise and appropriate a sum of money not to exceed $360,000 to complete the permitting and design process of the inner harbor coastal structures, building on money that has already been spent. This is to complete that process.
Okay.
Just a quick clarifying question for me. So 360, we're just raising the cap, so it's not an additional 360 on top of what's already been spent.
It is an additional.
It is
360. Yes.
So they've spent the 175
That
and
is-
240.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Permitting is.
And actually, no, I didn't.
It has been settled that the proposal is that it comes from reserve funds transfer, right, rather than any other source of funding, right?
I do not know the answer to that question. I mean, we kept the language at the beginning broad. Right? We said appropriate, borrow, transfer. And our recommendation seemed to be that the town appropriate or transfer from available funds these monies. I haven't got any guarantee or commitment that that's what the town wants to do.
The alternative would be to borrow, and I would be very surprised if we would elect to borrow
such a small amount
for such a small amount of money. So, in all likelihood, it would be from our rainy day fund cash.
This is the thing John Copeland checks towards the end, right?
Oh, yes.
So,
Yes.
so we can go ahead and vote this.
Will be made.
Okay.
Right.
So you should just change that last sentence, though, that this article asks the town, well, I guess it does ask it in the article, but we're not recommending borrowing.
Right. We're recommending appropriate or transfer.
Additional comments, questions?
I have a question on, in the recommendation, it talks about the line, the sum of money not to exceed $360,000 to be expended by the select board for use of permitting, design, and harbor coastal structures. that a change?
No.
So, the reason for the question is this is the third tranche for this activity. And we're approaching $1 million.
Yep.
And it certainly needs to be done. But how will the expenditures be monitored in such a way that we're getting something in return, some tangible impact?
Well, my understanding from the Harbor Development Committee is that basically the state changed the rules, that they had a permitting plan in place that used a substance or a material that had previously been allowed. And then the state said, well, no, that's really kind of a hard structure and we want you to go back to sand and you can't get a permit based on what you proposed. You need to go back to the drawing board and come up with another proposal. And that really was an unanticipated change. And I mean, I suppose there's two ways to look at it. I mean, on the one hand, if they learn new information, then they probably should put out new requirements for permitting. On the other hand, it's very frustrating to the firms and the committees that do this work that start off with, a goalpost here that then gets changed over here. And that then requires additional permitting process, in addition to the fact that it's been delayed and delayed by review of the state. I mean, not delayed.
Well, it is a project that started in 2015, so it's, we're going on 9 years.
Exactly. I mean, it's, yeah.
Okay. Additional questions or comments? Are you good, Joe? Or do you...
Certainly. I agree that we need to spend the money because this is a real need and it's coming more real every day. Just go down there on a stormy day and you'll see the flooding. It's just the control of the expenditure is really what I was questioning, so that we get something.
Oh yeah, right.
Well, and I would say my comment to that would be that it's better that it's the select board than the committee, because the select board is an elected body. So.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
And that's not unusual to
Yeah,
have them
I mean,
be
I
the
think
ones that
that's-
expend and authorize the contract.
I'm fine.
Right. And the funds that were used produced tangible benefits.
Yes, they had to do the first part of it. And, right.
Okay. All right, if there are no additional comments, then I will take a motion.
So moved.
There is no motion to move.
Yes, there was. She read it. Right? Did you read
Did
the
you read
recommend
I'm sorry.
motion?
I should
read
the town.
Okay,
Sorry.
sorry.
Recommend that the town appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money not to exceed $360,000 to be expended by the select board to be used for the permitting and design of inner harbor coastal structures to address safety issues, sea level rise, and harborside activities.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no additional comments, questions, then we will come to vote. Roll call vote. Nancy?
Aye.
Gina?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Eveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Lindsay? Jason?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Okay, thank you all. Next item on our agenda is liaison reports. Do we have any liaison reports?
Cleaner Greener Hingham proposed their 2 plastic bottle ban bylaw articles, municipal and retail bans in front of the select board on Tuesday, and both of them passed unanimously by the select board. So Brian and I will be working on those.
Okay, thank you. Additional, let's see again. Okay. We have an update on our forecast from Sue. We have a new one coming up fairly soon, so if perhaps a quick one.
I can't move though.
You can't move?
She's running the.
No, we're doing it for the Zoom. I can't move my computer. So can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh. Andy, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
We will have a new forecast, March the 3rd, so. Did you see the oil derrick in the back?
Everybody see this? So, there's only a couple of things that have changed. The first and most important thing that changed is local receipts, and I'll go over it.
So can you make it any larger?
It's just here.
That's better.
Local receipts. I thought you were gonna give me another pass there. So all right, local receipts went up about almost $1 million.
I'm sorry to hear that.
929,500, and I'll show you what categories it went up. And Article 6 went up by about $45,000, and that is due to the truck assessment. They did the calculations, and unfortunately, Hingham's call volumes went up significantly, so our assessment went up about $45,000. In Article 4 has gone down. What I did is I took out all of the union contracts. Usually when we start the budget process, I just take the percentage times all salaries. But now I took out all the contracts that are already in the budget. So it has gone down from the 787 down to the 391, which is a plus of 395,000. The revenue.
So wait a minute, can you go back to that for a minute?
Sure.
What, it went down from what?
When we first started, it was 787,000, and now we're down to 391.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. For the revenue for local receipts, we moved the motor vehicle excise tax up by $279,050. We got the first commitment at the end of January, and that is the first commitment for FY23. And what we do is we take that and figure out how much percentage that it went up, and then we take it for FY24. We're comfortable putting it up to $5.3 million. Meals tax, we put up another $50,000. Right now, we are hopefully maybe first time hit $1 million in meals tax. So, and but the last 2 quarters of the year are usually the lowest, so we just want to make sure we can hit the 950. The next one is license and permits. We increased that by 200,000, talking with building and all the other permitting departments, and we feel comfortable with putting it up to 1.5 million. And the last one is investment income. We increased that by $400,000. This is the one area that is the most volatile because interest rates, as you know, are going up or were going up, but they are starting to come down. It's great for the debt, but it's not great for the investment income. So when interest rates go down, then the investment income is gonna go down.
Sue, the investment income must be what, tax receipts, like in overnight, so what's that coming from?
Investment income is,
Yeah.
all of the cash we have
Yeah.
that is invested in MDT,
Which is what, MDT is what?
the Mass Municipal.
Something or other?
Yeah.
So like some form of money market situation?
No, the treasurer's office only has certain, the MMDT is basically really the only place we can invest our money. We can't go out and invest in anything. It's regulatory that they can only go to a certain place.
Cash portfolio for public entities.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I would think it's going the other way. That's the only thing. So did you raise it or you lowered it?
We raised it.
Yeah, okay. So,
Oh, yeah, no, we
Yeah.
raised it by 400,000.
yeah, no, all right. The way you described it was the opposite. So it's bad for the debt, but good for the interest income.
Yeah, but now that the rates are coming down,
That's right.
It's reversing again.
the rates are starting to come down.
No, they're not.
Oh,
No, they're not. I mean, not if it's invested in, in, cash, basic money. I mean, I'll take a look at it. That doesn't matter, so I'm sorry.
Well, in talking to capital markets,
Okay.
the rates are going to start to come down.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's all of the local receipts that we have increased. The next forecast that we will have will basically we'll have our hopefully our insurance rates. Those come out March 2nd. And I was already told we have a forecast meeting March 3rd. So I will be very busy March 2nd trying to figure out what the budget's gonna be. Does anybody have any questions? That will bring our deficit down to 6.2.
Does that not include the additional ones?
It does
That's not. The level service.
Just the level service.
I think the next forecast probably will count everything.
So, I mean, just back in the napkin, then is it? Then some of these numbers give the 2.7. On top of the 6.2, so the 1.5 from the schools, the 673, and then the 500 to capital outlay. Is that a fair?
If all goes through.
Yeah. I'm just.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But hopefully health insurance budget comes down. And there are other things that we are going to look at, excess overlay, in anything else that is hopefully state aid maybe. You know, if we can get the budget within the next couple of weeks, that might be a little bit more. Anybody have any questions?
All right, thank you. Sue, did you have a question?
Just when we get there next week, can we talk about how that new proposed sustainable fund related to like the budget that we're putting forth in I think there's an article for that, right? How that like plays into all of this in future years?
The what?
The new fund that we're proposing to create, right? Where that
Stabilization.
stabilization fund related to like excess. Can we just talk about how that plays into the budget, like going forward next year? I'm trying to wrap my head around. Is that something that plays out in 24 if it's approved, or is that a 2025?
Whenever we take on the debt.
I think,
That though, right? I mean, we could talk about it next week,
yeah,
but.
I think all of that will come out, certainly if not in the MOU. If not before, at least it will come out in the MOU, which will take the current forecast, the most recent forecast, whatever we decide is going to be the override now, and play that through the John Asher model and see with the goal. I think the task force had a goal of like 4 to 5 years before the next override. And that's with that And that's where that comes in.
It's going to hopefully extend it to 4 or 5 years.
Right, good, and I think, is it next week?
Yes.
So next Tuesday, we'll talk about those two stabilization funds.
Great, that's perfect.
And,
It's really solid. Yeah.
all gonna come together magically. So, okay. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, one more.
Oh, sure.
Why did the 2.5% increase go up by 3.3%?
Because of the debt exclusion, 2.5% is on the tax levy. And then.
Right. So as you look at tax levy, it said levy was that. And then 2.5% increase. The increase 24 over 23 is 3.35%.
If the add the new growth.
Then the next line is new growth, which is down.
That's the next year, new growth. So you get the 2024 levy, you take the 23 levy and you add the new growth to it.
And the 2.5%.
Plus the 2.5%.
Plus the 2.5.
Okay, right.
The new tax levy is the prior year's top three lines. And then you take 2.5% on that.
Yep.
I made it.
All right, further questions for Stu? And, so a couple of housekeeping items. We do not have minutes for the 7th, so we'll pass that on. Our next meeting is this coming Tuesday. We will have warrant articles on light plan, tax stabilization, capital stabilization, and Article W, Chapter 59. So, if you would, if anyone who, the 4 of you, or the 3 of you who have those articles, if you would get your comments out to the team as soon as possible, certainly probably no later than Sunday. Give us a chance to read them and get back to you with any edits if you have them. That would be great. We will do a meeting after that, will be the 28th. We will have a joint meeting with the select board and I guess the school committee on the presentation of capital outlay budget. And we will cover warrant articles O, T, U, X, and double B. So some busy times coming up on the articles. We've sort of gone through the perennials, which are generally the easiest ones. So these other ones will have more nuances to them, and so I appreciate the work that you all have put into them. We have more to go. So, and the last thing I would say is that for those of you who had your warrant articles approved tonight, if there were any edits or comments that were made, please make them. Slap on an approved date as a footer and forward those articles to your editor so that they can make sure that they are in full compliance with all the guidelines and keep them moving. Okay, questions, comments? Sorry, we are here late again this night, but we are marching towards a middle of March deadline. So W is coming up, yes, on the 21st. I do not. We're going to start with the this budget again, so later probably. She can come by soon. I think that's appropriate. If there are no additional comments, I will take a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have to do a roll call vote, and so if anyone is not familiar with the concept, as long as we're not all in the meeting room, we have to do a roll call. So incentive, yes. But Andy is not feeling well, so I appreciate him being at home, even though we miss him in the room. Nancy.
Aye.
Tina.
Aye.
Andy.
We're mute.
Let some say aye. His lips move.
Andy, we're adjourning.
Did I, but he's on.
No, he's
Is
on
he-
mute.
okay. All right. Brenda?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Kathy?
Yeah, aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Lindsay? Jason? And Carol.
Hey, and I'm I too.
Did I not call you?
You got confused with Andy. I always follow you.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.